Okay, welcome guys to part 2 of the VIP Luminaire and Solaris event. And I hope you guys enjoyed part 1 with the embroidery block. And what we're going to do today is go over all the sewing functions on the machine. And we've added a few little hidden gems in there towards the end, right, Joe?
Yeah.
So this is Joe. This is my camera guy. And he actually... Do you want to tell them what you did for your school project after being the camera guy last time?
After I was the camera guy, I had to do a book report, and I had to make a doll for my book report for my great-grandpa, and we couldn't figure out how to draw the hat that my dad has kind of slanted, so we used the Luminaire to we took a picture of me and the hat on me, and then we sewed it up.
Yep, so we took the picture. It was pretty smart. We tried to draw it over and over, and I'm not a very good artist, so we were trying to draw it, and then Joe said, well, can't we just use the machine? And I wasn't quite sure what he meant by that, but from being behind the camera, he was able to go through the steps that we did last time, actually, to create the tree. So he went through the steps and said, well, we can take a picture and I can put the hat on. We can take a picture of me with the hat on, how great-grandpa would wear it. And then we could use the projector. And anyway, he went through the whole steps. He embroidered the hat out, and then we hooked him on his little character, and it was pretty awesome. So I'm glad that we were able to do that, and I hope you guys are learning as much watching these videos as I am making them and as Joe is doing the camera work. So this is the next part of the project, and like I said, we're going to have a few hidden gems in there as you watch. Had a few mistakes and a few changes, but I think all in all, it's been fun. So we're going to do that. There will be a part 3. Part 3, we're going to bring in a guest lecturer on camera. So pretty excited about that, right, Joe? Mm-hmm. If they watch the video, they're going to see who it is. So thank you guys. Hope you enjoy and have fun sewing. Okay, so now that we're done doing the embroidery part of the block, we're going to move on to the next section. And in the class, I had you guys do this blanket stitch outline, replicating, applique or what have you first, but I think we're going to switch it up. I think you really need to have just a little bit more practice with one of the new features, which is that pattern end function. So we're going to put a lot of practice to that first, and then we will go over the top of it with the blanket stitch when we're done. So I'm going to zoom in up top and we'll talk about it, because the next thing we are going to work on is these 4 corners. And they're all the exact same, meaning once we do what we're doing in here, you can do it and repeat it 4 times. And I would do it in steps, since we have twin needle work, we'll do all 4 corners with twin needle and so forth. So we're going to zoom in up to the top of this so I can talk about it really quickly. We have on here, you can see this is a twin needle, and so all the white areas are twin needle sewing, so we will cover that. But the big thing is we use the grids, and so I really want you to feel comfortable with the grids, because we didn't mark anything on this fabric, which is pretty awesome. The next thing that we have, these are directional feed stitches, and even what's in here, that means the fabric's going to move left and right instead of just forward and back. And a lot of us, we hesitate to use these features because they're so wide, they get really big, and we're not sure if they're going to fit into the area that we're trying to work in. So for instance, right into here. So I'm going to show you what I do to make sure that those stitches fit, and also how to control them, because that's the other thing. It's like a straight stitch, but even harder. A straight stitch, you still have to control that. You can't just say, I want a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then it does it. You still have to guide that. Well, on these stitches here, they're going to be moving the fabric left and right and on diagonals and forward and back. So it does take a little bit of practice, but there are some tips that can make this easier. So I want to go through and talk about that as well. And then we also have on here, this is the new hand quilted stitch. Really, really cool. And so we're going to use that as well. So we will follow up after these 4 corners are all completed with the applique stitch around, which we are using that new pattern end function and getting these really nice finished corners on that as well. So that's the next step. I'm going to grab a scrap piece of fabric, and that's what I like to do. I like to get a scrap piece of fabric that I can work with to do some test outs on these directional feed stitches, so I can get comfortable with the direction that they move in and how they work before I actually put it onto my project. So I'll show you my process, and by no means is mine the only way, but after doing this several times, I think I've really narrowed it down to something that I find works well for me. So I will get that fabric going and we will meet back in a minute and get started. Okay, I've got my scrap fabric, but what I want to do first before we go too far is I want to explain the settings that we're going to use. So I'm going to go into the settings menu, and one of the options on page 3, if I scroll over, there's a section that says Endpoint Setting Temporary Stop. I'm going to turn that on, and the reason that I want it on is because I'm going to use my digital dual feed foot, or the brother calls it their move it foot. And when we use that, because it's such a bulky foot, we want the sticker, endpoint sticker, which you will see, we want that directly in front of the foot instead of offset to the side. So it is turned on. There's going to be an option, and I'm going to tell you, we're going to go into a function that I'm going to call stitch attributes. There's the little house, and then there's an icon right underneath it. When I touch that, there's a new icon on your screen that you're going to be able to play with. We're going to touch that. That's going to take us into what's called endpoint settings. And we use endpoint settings, you guys, to get these perfect endings to our stitches so they don't overrun and go too far. You're going to use that on a lot of the project. We're going to use it over and over so you can get comfortable with it. What I want you to understand, though, is the settings portion of this. So when we go into endpoint settings, we can go in and we can make some changes. One, you have to have it turned on. And the next thing that we're looking at is down here, it's saying, how do you want us to end the pattern? We're just using a straight stitch, so the straight stitch, it really doesn't affect that much on here. It's going to say, if I were to select this icon, it's going to say just end the pattern wherever you're at the ending point. Okay, so wherever that sticker is. On here, it's saying once you recognize the sticker, it's telling the machine, once you recognize the sticker, start adjusting the stitch. So if I was using, which we're going to do later, a blanket stitch, I don't want it just to end wherever it wants. I want those really nice crisp points when I make that applique and that turn. So we would turn this on, and that would start adjusting the stitch so it can be a full stitch when it's at the end. So those are your options on there. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a look over here at the machine. And when we slide over to the machine, there's going to be on here this sticker, but then there's also up top, you'll see there's a blue line. That blue line comes on when we turn on the function of endpoint settings. And what endpoint settings will do is, based on where I've placed that sticker, the machine is going to come down. And what I want you to focus on while this is stitching is you're going to see down in this little area by the sticker, you're going to see blue light come on and like a shadow kind of watching over this. And it's going, that's just the system recognizing where the sticker is placed. Up here, that blue line is where your stitching is going to start. Now, because we turned the settings on and we wanted it to go towards the sticker directly in front, we have that turned on. We're going to let the system go and do its job. So I'm going to take, and I'm just going to hit the start button. It's going to go in, and what it's going to do is it's going to stitch. It's going to stitch down, and then it's going to see, you can see that light come on. It's recognizing the sticker. So it's now recognizing it. And what happens is on my screen, it's going to come up and it's going to say on here, it's telling me after removing the endpoint sticker, continue sewing. So what it's saying is go ahead and take that endpoint sticker off. And again, you can see that blue light that's illuminating on there. What it's going to do, what the system is going to do, and we'll just kind of focus this a little bit higher up here on the foot, is it's going to take, and once I remove that sticker, it's now going to track that, and it's going to go in. I'm going to touch OK on my screen of my machine, and now it's going to go in. It's finding that where that sticker was, and now it's picking that endpoint. So now we'll, actually let me just go in and hit the cut. So when you look at this, it went in and it hit that right on target. So if we look, my stitching came right up to that line perfectly. And that's what that feature does. Now, I'm not even actually near the machine. You can't really see what's happening behind this camera. I'm behind the camera most of the time. I hit the start button, then I kind of let the machine do its thing. So I'm going to show you the second setting to that. It works, the idea is the same, but we're going to move this a little bit to the right. So we're going to be all the way over here to the right. You need to either be on the right or the left for this next option. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to go too far to the right or left. So you want to stay within about an inch, inch and a half. So if I were to take this and I have my blue line up top, so let's get up to the top again. So there's my blue line. If I want to start the next set of stitching to match, I can take that blue line and I can just move this up here until that blue line matches that stitch line there. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I've got that matched up somewhat. I can't really see on that side. Again, running the camera and operating the machine. So I'm going to put that foot down and we're going to change that one setting that we changed on the machine settings to begin with. So we're going to go up into settings again. And once I go into settings, we're going to change this, saying that we have to turn off endpoint, which is fine. We're going to go to page 3, and then we're going to turn endpoint setting, temporary stop. We're going to turn that off. That means it's not going to do that temporary stop for me to pull off the sticker. And that's okay. The reason that we wanted it to do a temporary stop is because we didn't want to stitch over the top of the sticker. But because the sticker is offset to the right, it's not going to stitch over it anyway. I'm now going to go in, we're going to go in and turn on our endpoint settings. You can make your changes, whatever you need it to be on there. You can make those adjustments at this point. So we're going to touch the endpoint settings. That key's on, and now you can see it's visibly moved to the right. So that sticker's to the right of the actual stitching. So we're going to get started. I'm going to reach in front here and I'm going to get this going. And once it's stitching, it's now going to go through and it's going to recognize the ending, but it's going to keep stitching. Because we didn't turn on that pause, it's going to stitch all the way to the end. Now I can touch my cut, and based on where you place that sticker, it's going to match up to that spot on there. So we can go in and we can take a look at that, and again, based on where I place that sticker, it hits that right exactly where that sticker was placed. So that's the advantage of the new function that's on here. Really, really cool. So you don't have to really, babysit much of anything at this point. So we're going to turn that on. That's one of the features that we're going to work with. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to work with the grids as well. So before we move to the project, I went and put on the digital dual feed, which is what Baby Lock calls this foot here, and Brother calls it their Move It foot. And a couple things that you need to think about or make sure that you have done. On the side here, on the inside, there's a lever that you need to have engaged all the way down. What that's going to do is it's going to activate that little rubber piece, and that's going to actually advance the fabric forward. So different than a walking foot, this actually grips the fabric and pulls it through. So pretty awesome feature. We do have our twin needles in, and so those are ready to go. And one more thing involving the Move It or digital dual feed foot. You do have to plug it in on the left-hand side, on the back side of the machine, so make sure that you do that. I like to do that with the machine turned off personally. I just don't like to hot sink any pieces, but that's kind of up to you. And then up on top, I do want to make sure that we take a look. Right in here, this guide typically gets forgotten. And I think it's really important that you make sure when you're doing your twin needles, you've got 2 threads, that it comes through here. The machine was designed for the thread to come through here, and then there's a metal piece right onto the side here that it should rub across as well. I'll slide over. So your thread will rub right across that side piece, this metal in there, as long as it's in that guide. If not, your thread could get caught anywhere up into here, and I see that typically happening when people are embroidering using their thread stand, their vertical thread stand, and so it's a really easy fix. Just make sure that that's on there. Next, we're going to switch over to the screen of the machine because we're going to make a few changes. Okay, so I've gone through and done a little bit of setup on this screen, and I'll explain to you what we're looking at. So the first thing that you want to do immediately, either before or right after you put in your twin needles, you want to go into, again, I'm going to call it Stitch Attributes. It's the icon under the house. So once we select that, you're immediately going to want to go down to the icon that has the twin needles. That's going to keep you from having issues with your twin needles going too wide and breaking on the foot. So make sure that you do that. It also keeps you from using your needle threader. So the needle threader will be disabled when that's selected, which is important because the needle threader really can't work on a twin needle and could damage the needle threader permanently long term. So you need to make sure that you go in and do that. And then we have selected, I'll close that down, I am into the utility stitch menu, and I have selected category 2. Again, up here we can slide this over. So category 2 and stitch is 219. So that's the stitch that we have selected. When I select that stitch, it automatically sets up the width, the length, and so on. I actually am going to go a little bit wider. So on the width down here at the bottom, we're going to switch that to be at a 7. And whenever you do this, you want to test it out. And what I mean by test it out is you need to check and make sure that your twin needle can handle that width. When we activated the twin needle setting in the stitch attributes section, that's based off of a 2.0 millimeter twin needle. That's the twin needle that came with your machine. So if you're going to go any wider than that, you've got to be a little bit careful and make sure that it's going to work. So what I like to do is I will go over here to the machine, and I like to take and with using the hand wheel, I actually will go through and I'll hand turn the needles so they're going to go all the way, and I'm not worrying about the thread right this second. I can rethread that if need be. But I'm rotating the hand wheel and I'm watching to make sure that those needles don't come down on top of the foot or come too close to the foot itself. They need to go right through that opening. And I would do that. I would rotate that through all the way through on both sides. So meaning that it goes all the way to the left and it makes its way all the way to the right. So we're going to come onto the machine and we're going to activate the grid line or the guidelines. It's the little pocket with the little laser kind of sticking out on there. So when we go into here, you want to make sure that your guidelines are turned on. We're going to work with the main line first, and we'll kind of go through and show you how that gets changed around. You have different shapes that you can work it off of. Again, you can go and play with this, but line length, large, medium, small, color, that's just the color that it's going to reference on your fabric. So that's the color it's going to be. And then we have the main line positioning, and we'll talk about some of this as we move through the project. I want to go into the subline because that's actually where my grids are. So you have different options of sublines. You can even turn them off. We're going to activate the grid, so we need to make sure that's activated, and then you can choose your color, whatever works best on your fabric. And there's different size. This is where we can change the size of the grid. And so now that that's turned on, I'll move you over to the machine, well, to the grid itself showing on the presser foot, and we'll kind of work through that. Let me get you some white fabric underneath. So this is just my sample fabric that we're placing underneath here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to look at our grid line. So those are the grids that are being displayed down on here. And as we're working through the project, you guys, what we're really trying to do is we're going to decide how far apart we want, for instance, in the project. What we did, I'm going to take my presser foot, lift it up, and get this over. So what we did is I just needed to decide how far apart I wanted to have each of these white lines with the twin needle. So I determined I wanted them to be 1 inch apart. So we went 1 inch grid spacing. So let me show you how I set that up. Right now, if we were to look over at our screen, so we're going to be switching back and forth for a second here. If we were to look at our screen on here, right now my grids are set at 21 millimeters. So if I were to adjust this, that actually is going to change, and I'll switch it over, and you'll find at some point at 25.4 millimeters, you're going to see the 1 inch. And so that's how we set that up. I want you to see, I'm going to minus and plus this with the camera over on the fabric so you can see the changes that are being made. But ultimately, I'm going to set this up with the grid at a 25.4 grid setting. So here's our grid. And as I adjust on the machine, you're going to see that grid either getting smaller, if I go to the minus side, So the grid is getting smaller. Or if I go to the plus, so right now I'm at a 1/2 inch, or I can go larger, and we're going to take that all the way back out to the inch. So that's how we set up our grids, and so now that grid is going to be exactly perfect for my 1-inch measurement on my fabric. So with that set, what I would like to do is now show you what I do in order to get those 1-inch settings perfect. So we'll go over. Okay, so if I wanted to come over 1 inch from, a seam line or another stitch, these are indicating 1 inch on here. So I can move that back and forth. So we can move that over. I can also, in my mainline screen, in my main, on my guideline screen, I'm going to select an option. I'm not going to move the camera. I'm just going to tell you what I'm doing. On the main, I'm going to change it from green to red. So you're going to see some of these are going to stay green, and that's the grid, and then the other change to a red. And that's going to be my main line. So my main line changed to a red. That's the actual stitch line. So when it says main line, it's referencing the stitch line, but you're going to see later, we're going to use that and manipulate it just a little bit to do some different things as far as when we're doing alignment. So if I wanted to come 1 inch from something, whatever it is, we're going to reference this stitch line. If I want to come 1 inch over, I'm exactly 1 inch when I put that grid line on there. And now if I were to go in and we were to stitch, we could take, and it's going to go in and it's going to do that 1 inch over. And I'm just keeping that line right on top of there. So it's a really great way to get in and do, grid quilting or anything of that nature. And that foot is just perfect. It takes and it feeds that fabric so smooth all the way down. Doesn't pucker, doesn't move it in any direction that way. So now we'll see if we can get that white to show. I have white thread, there we go. So we have our white thread, and that's what we're going to get as far as our twin needle stitch. Now, as we're working with this, we're going to add a few other elements in. We're going to use our new stop feature in there, and we're going to use the grids. So the next thing that I'm going to do, if I want this to be exactly 1 inch over, I'm going to take this stitch that I just worked with, I'm going to slide it one direction or the other. If I want to do another stitch to the right, I'm going to move my previous stitch to the left. I'd align it where I want it to be as far as where I want it to start. And now I've got that going right down the middle. So now there's one set of twin needle stitching. I can just move over, and now I've got another, just by guiding that right down the center, I've got another set of twin needle stitching happening perfectly 1 inch away. So that's what we're going to do on our fabric, and I will try to update you with more information as I move through this on different settings. But let's get this started on the fabric and get going. So now we're about to do the twin needles with the white thread. And so the first one that we're going to do, the first line down, we're not going to use our endpoint setting. And the reason that we're not is it won't read it. It's too short of a difference because of the side. So if we zoom in here and we look at the grid that we have set, what we're going to do is we're going to take this, and what I want to do is I'm going to come and I'm going to line one grid because I know my needles are already in the middle. So what I want to do is I want to get one grid set, and I'm going to align this so those grids, this side here, it perfectly matches. So the grid, I'm not sideways or skiwampus. I want it to be a 90-degree angle. So I'm going to, along with the 90-degree angle that was created from my stitching earlier. So now I've got that set. And that's going to put me, not only is that a 90-degree angle from here, but then it's also going to really put me at about a 1 inch spacing from the inside. And that's really the plan. Now, if you find, which is what's happening on mine here, if you look, my actual red line, I don't know if that shows very well on the camera, but it's too far to the right. And so that really doesn't put me at a perfect 1 inch. I want that red line right down the middle. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back over to my screen that we're looking at over here. I am going to turn on my I've got my grid lines back in. So I went in, it kind of looks like a pocket with a line, that icon, the third one down up on top. That's what my son told me, it looks like a pocket. So now what we're going to do is we're going to shift that main line. If it's not directly in the middle, which is where we need it to be, we're going to go to the main line, and now we can shift that left and right. So I'm just moving this over, so my main line is now running basically right down the center of the foot. So if we look at the fabric now, shifting that main line, put that line right down the middle, which is what we want. Once we have that set, now I can line up, like I said before, the right side to square it off. And then we're going, so this side is perfectly square with the grid line. This line is matching the grid line up top. And now, so we're going to zoom in on that so you can see that. Perfect match, perfect match. So now I can take, and as long as I'm on the white to begin with, which I am, again, this first one, we can't use our pattern end on there because the distance from here to here is not quite an inch. It's really too small. Even this next one is a little bit short. But here's what I'm going to do. I know that I'm going to do on here 3 lines. And let me grab my other sample so you can see what I'm talking about. So I'm going to have, I'll pull it in here for you. So I'm going to have my 3 lines that we're working with. So the 3 lines that we're creating are going to be these 3 on the right side, and then we're going to have 3 on the left side. Well, I'm going to use, this one's really close to being long enough to work with. So I might as well, while I'm here, I might as well mark my pattern ends on my other fabric, and I'll show you, because once I do, so I'm going to use 2 different stickers. So now that I've got this lined up, I'm ready to do my first set of stitching. But once I do my first set, I'm going to do my next set. So I might as well have it ready, and it's already, the grid is 1 inch apart. So I'm going to put the bold line right down the stitching of this next one. And I want the center of this, I'm trying to do this without getting my head in front of you. But the center of this is going to line up with the grid line. So there's one. So that one's all perfectly set and matching. And then my next one is going to be, I'm going to turn those off for a second. And then I'm going to do my next sticker just to the right of that one. So I'm going to have 2 stickers placed, 2 snowball stickers, not the snowman, but the snowball. And I'm going to have them set just right in here and lining up with where I want them to end and straight down the line. Okay? So once I have those placed, and hopefully they're pretty accurate. Again, I'm just kind of looking from the side, trying to stay out of the camera view. Once I have those 2 placed, I'm ready to do the first line. And just keep in mind, you're going to have to stop this first line. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to do a start. I'm going to slow my machine down. I'm going to let it go through. It's going to do a start and it's going to stitch. Once it comes all the way down and matches up, I'm going to stop. You have on your machine, and I'll show you this really fast, you might as well see this. Up top here, and let me show you, just up here, this icon is your tie-in stitch. So if you want to tie the stitch in at the beginning and at the end, you can. There's different ways you can reinforce it at the beginning. But we're going to hold this button in. That'll reinforce that. And then it does a cut because I have it set for that. So that's my first line. I went a little bit short from going all the way to the line. So if we zoom in, you can see that. This is really why I like pattern end, because it's going to take me all the way up to that line and I don't have to think about it. But again, this was so small, we didn't have that option. But that's okay. So our next stitch is going to be exactly 1 inch away. So if you look, this is where we stitched. We have our red line on there. As I slide this over, I'm moving my needles, so the next grid lines are going to line up right with the sticker. The red line in the middle, which is my main line, is going to go right down the center. I'm going to move this up to where I start on the white of the, I have my lines marked. Yours would just be the seam line. You don't have to go to the white. And now, if you can see this hopefully on camera, I've got it set on here where I'm in the white. My red line is going to come down and it's going to hit this just right. And so the next thing that we need to do on our screen, let's take a look really quickly. We're going to go in onto our screen and we're going to make sure that we have activated we are going to go in Stitch Attributes. We're going to go down here to the last icon for Endpoint Settings. And again, we don't mind if it just finishes it off wherever it is. And I've got it turned on. So now that we have all those settings ready to go, let's go back to the fabric. And we're going to run this down. I'm just going to we're going to start this. I can speed it up now. I'm not too worried because the machine is going to recognize this sticker and then it's going to stop. It's going to stop and it says after removing the sticker, I'm going to touch OK on my screen. So after I remove the sticker, I touched OK on my screen. It's now reading where the pattern's supposed to stop. And one thing I'm doing is over here, now that I removed the sticker, that was my target to kind of line me up before. But now I'm just keeping this right down the middle because that keeps it 1 inch all the way. And we just let the machine go through. It's going to find that end and it's going to be right on. So now it's going to hit that end. I'm going to go up, touch my pattern end button, which we talked about earlier. And my scissors are done. And now that's perfect. If we look at this in the light, this zoomed in. I'm trying to move this because it keeps getting all the little lines. But it hit that line perfectly that time, which is exactly what we want. We're going to move 1 more inch over. So I've got my red line, which is my main line. I'm going to line that up. I'm going to get it lined up with the seam up at the top. And I'm watching this main line come down, and I want it to hit right down the center of the sticker. I'm also looking over on the right-hand side, and we're just 1 inch off right there. I've got it perfectly set at 1 inch from that right hand on there. So this is lined up with the center, and so I'm ready to go. I'm just going to take, and I'm running it right down the middle. It's going to recognize it. It's going to see it. It's going to tell me, hey, we need to stop for a minute. We're going to pull that sticker off. And again, I just set the stickers onto the machine. And then we're going to touch our start or our OK button on the screen. We're going to touch OK on the screen and then the start button. It's going to go in. It's going to finish it. Perfect stop. We can touch our pattern end button. I'm going to hold it in so it'll finish that off. And then we can touch our scissors. So it locked it in. So that's perfect. Both of those ended exactly where that ending was. The first one, not exact, but it's close. And the reason that it's not exact really is because that's the one that I had to manually do and do myself. I'm going to show you really quickly on the left side of this because I did 3 on the right. Then we're going to do 3 on the left the exact same way. It's just we're going to come from the left in. And then I'm going to finish the other 4 corners the exact same way. And then we will come back and move on to the next spot. So I'm going to come in. I'm coming in on the left-hand side. I'm just taking this. We're lining it up with the seam on the left-hand side this time and the straight line on there. So my grid, I also have it up in the seam line up top. And once we're ready to go, I'm going to drop my needles down. I have that lined up perfectly. I'm a little bit off on there, so I'm going to just take and I'm going to slide this over. If I had my knee lift in, that would be ideal, and that's what I would use. Again, just trying to keep out of the way of the camera. So we're going to sew this down. I'm going to slow the speed down because it's a really small area that I'm working with. This time, hopefully, we're a little bit closer. I'm going to take a look underneath and just see where we're at. Yeah, we're better. So we got a little bit better on there, so I'm going to tie that stitch off. We're going to clip that. I'm going to grab my 2 stickers and do the same thing that I did last time. So now, here's my stitching, and we're going to slide that over to the left because I need it over onto the left side. I'm going to line this up so it's perfectly square. So I've got this side lined up, this side lined up. This stitching is perfectly lined up with the stitching that I just did. And now we're going to take our sticker. We're going to line it up with the dark line going down the middle. I want my red line coming straight down. Again, we want that red line just coming straight down right through the center of that sticker. We're pretty good on there. So that's going to be one sticker. And then what I'm going to do is I want my next sticker 1 more inch over. So all I'm going to do, and this one, it's not going to be the red line because it's going to be the set of stitching over to the side. I'm going to put this guy in here. And I'm going to get, it's the grid line. I'm just going to run that grid line exactly down the center of this. Looks good. We're ready to slide this up. I'm going to get up to the top. We're going to get that red line running straight down that line on there. And once we're aligned with the middle of that piece there, and I feel comfortable, we're about 1 inch over here. We're ready to hit our start button. Oh, it's telling me that the distance, it's actually reading it and thinking the distance is a little too short, but I think we're going to be okay. I'm going to take these needles up, slide our fabric in. It looks like we're centered, and let's go for it. Oh, it's again. So right now, what it's telling me, you guys, is it says, hey, you're just short of what we can read. And I'm okay with that. I think maybe I need to actually give myself a little bit more space at the top. So we're going to slide this fabric up just a hair. And now we're in line. I'm just watching that red line go straight down. And we know these are 1 inch apart. It tells me to take off the sticker. We're going to hit OK on our screen, and we're going to touch the OK or the start button on the machine. Now we have a perfect finished line. And once you get used to this, if you're not trying to go through and explain all of the details, it actually goes fairly quick. And again, the big thing is they're going to be equally spaced. This one's already set, so I'm going to pull this up. I'm lining that red line as close as I can down to center. We're going to drop those needles into the fabric. Needle, we're lined up here. We're going to put this guy down. And all we're going to do is stitch. It's recognizing the end. Once it's done, it's going to tell me it's going to stop. Tells me to take off the sticker. I touch OK on my screen of my machine. Then we stitch forward again. And it will stop perfectly where it's supposed to go. Tie that in, and then we're done. Okay, so I'm going to take and do the other 4 sides, other 4 corners. So we can zoom out on the camera really quickly. So right now, this is the setup that we have. We're going to go in and we're going to do this corner, and this corner all the exact same way. And then I will get those done, and I'll meet you back for the next part of the project. So everything on the twin needles is done. We used our pattern end, and if you noticed when you turned your twin needle function on the machine, you were not able to use your needle threader, which is actually a good safety feature because your needle threader is made for single needle and not twin needle. So the next step that we're going to move on to now that we have our little twin needles set in is we're now, and I'll zoom in, we're now going to go into, these are called directional feed type stitches. And this is actually a combination that we put together, but these are directional feed stitches. And those can be really confusing for a lot of people because they feed left and right, and we're used to just stitches feeding forward and backwards. And so we kind of try to stay away from those a lot of times because we're not quite sure when the fabric's moving in all these different directions where the stitches are going to land. Your projector does a good job of kind of giving you an idea, but we really need to I use the grid lines, and I've done this several times, lots of different ways, and I really feel very comfortable with the way that I'm doing it now. So I'm going to kind of show you what I like to do. I first will use my grid lines to figure out the distance that I'm going to be putting my design into. So I'm going to put a design, for instance, in between these here. So what I like to do is and we'll go onto the machine so you can see it. So on the machine, on the screen of the machine, I like to go in and turn our grid lines on. That's, again, that kind of pocket looking icon with the little line underneath, up top. And I like to turn my grid lines on. And so now I have the grid lines, and I need to do a couple different things. So I need to first go in and I need to figure out, well, what's the actual spacing? We know that we did these 1 inch apart on the fabric. So we'll move back over to the fabric and kind of look at that. But I now need to figure out, okay, so we're pretty accurate on these being in there and being 1 inch apart, you know, on both ends. That's not the problem. What I want to know is, okay, well, where this zigzags in, that's going to be less than 1 inch. And I really need to know that distance so I can kind of work the designs inside there. So I like to take, and this could be a sashing on a quilt, it could be anything, a border, ribbon that you want to embellish a little bit more. I like to turn on my grids, and now I'm going to, we'll switch you back over again onto the screen of the machine so you can see this. But I'm going to go in and I'm going to adjust. We're going to be in the sub menu. So I've got the grid lines and they're on. I'm in the sub menu. I also have these set on here right now at the turned on. So I'm going to go in and I would like to adjust these grids so they actually match just to the inside. So instead of being at 1 inch, I know it's going to have to go smaller than that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to be hitting the minus key. While I'm doing that, I'm going to switch you back over to the fabric so you can see the adjustments that I'm making and why. So right now, I'm really going to focus over here or in this area, but really right here. We're really too wide to make that be where it fits. So let's look into here. So if we were to leave this at that width on the grid, we're really not going to be able to tell how much space we have in between. So that's where I'm minusing on my machine the grid size, and I'm just shrinking those grids down. And as I do that, I'm going to adjust this until my grids match to the inside of those stitches. So I want that grid literally just to the inside of those white lines. And then I'm going to use that. So right now, if I were to look, I've got the grid line and it's barely touching the white here and barely touching the white there. So that's pretty much the most accurate spacing. And so for me, the way that I stitch these out, and they all should be pretty darn close. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. It's going to sit at about 18 millimeters. I'm going to go just a little bit smaller because I want to make sure that I'm just inside of that. And so I'm right now at about 17 millimeters, so I'm in here. And so if we look on the screen, we adjusted on the screen the sub line, or not the line, well, the sub category that has the grids down to 17 millimeters. And so that's really going to put me at a spacing. So now that I know the spacing that was on my fabric, we'll go back over to the fabric. We're going to take the scrap piece of fabric, we're going to place it underneath here. And so there's the grid. So we've got our line, that's our stitch line right there. I'm actually just going to do a straight stitch just to the right of that, the twin needle stitch that we did earlier. So we're going to stitch this down. We're just going to let it run. We're going to do a straight stitch down. And what I'm going to do, you guys, I'm just using those measurements that we just created. And I'm going to do several lines. So this is my stitch line. This is the line I just stitched. This is what I'm going to stitch. I'm just going to move this over. And what I want to do is create channels. And I'm just creating these channels so I have something to work with. So this is, again, what I do. I do all of my testing on just some scrap fabrics. I use the grid, as I showed you before, to get a measurement of the space that I'm trying to fill. So if this was a ribbon, same thing. I would just have the width of the ribbon. If it was a sashing, same thing. I'd have the width of the sashing. And I would just sew several grids down. And the reason I'm sewing several is because, you know, the first time that I go in to put a new stitch in on here to test, it's probably not going to be perfect, and that's okay. So I'm going to do several of these. And this just allows me, again, to kind of practice what I want to do on my actual project without making those mistakes on the project itself. So we're going to get those in, and then we'll come back and we'll select a stitch and we'll show you how to work with stitches that are going to be multi-directional. So they're going to be moving left and right in all different directions. So, okay, so now that I have my channels created, What those channels are representing, just to make this clear, it's the little channels in between here. So we did the measurement, we sewed out the channels based off of the measurement, and again, that's on my fabric so I can test sew some of these designs out. So I'm going to select on my machine, the first stitch is going to be in Characters and Decoratives, and it's going to be in, it's 853. So we're going to go to the 8 folder and then scroll down to where we find 853. So we're going to concentrate on getting this one done, but remember, what we're doing for this design, because it is a design that moves left and right, it's the same thing that we're going to do for the others. So that's what we're going to do next. I want to take you from the fabric and we're going to move back over to our screen, and I want to show you some of the things that I make sure are turned on and that I do when I'm practicing getting those stitches to fit just right. Okay, so the first thing that I do is I would go in and select my stitch. So I went to Characters and Decoratives, I scrolled down, and then we went into stitch number 853. So that's this one here. So with that one selected, you'll see it pull up on the other side. We want to make sure that we also have the end foot on, so I will do that and make sure that that's on there. But with that selected and that foot on, the next thing I want to do, I want to audition the stitch. And what I mean by that is, we're going to use the projector. That's the little cone-shaped icon up here at the top. When I select that, it's going to now project onto my fabric the stitch that I have selected. So I'm going to take you back over to the fabric with that selected and just give you an idea of what that looks like and maybe change some settings over here as well. So with the projector turned on, it's actually projecting several things over here onto the side. So with that projector on, you can see the stitches being projected. And what I'm really looking for, you guys understand that this isn't the exact size of your stitch. It's a representation of what it's going to look like. The width is pretty accurate. The length, because of the way the projector is angled, is not always the exact size. So just understand that that might not line up exactly the same on the length, but it's pretty close. So this stitch happens to barely fit in. Now, if I wanted to, I could adjust that stitch. I could adjust the length and the width, and that can actually be done on your screen or down here. So that's what these icons are. You need to use your tool that came with your machine, the little stylus. It has to have a battery in it. And when you click this, there's a light that pops on. And so that will actually, if you watch the stitch for a second and I adjust the width, it's going to go in and it's actually adjusting the width of that stitch. So we can make those changes right here on the fabric if you feel that there's a need to adjust those. We're going to leave those at the default settings, so you won't really need to change that. You could also change the length plus or minus here. I just wanted you to understand that that's what that is. If I were to select this next icon here, this is going to adjust or shift the design left or right, so we can do a left or right shift. Again, we're not shifting it. I'm just explaining that that's what that is. And then the next thing is you've got this little icon over here. It shows stitches basically. If we select that, you're telling the machine you want to see, and it's a little hard to see, but there's some really faint designs over here. This is the stitch you have selected. This allows you to scroll through the next set of stitches and they'll pop up onto there. So you can audition stitches just by looking at them right here on the screen, once you have, or on the fabric, sorry, instead of the screen. Once you have what you want, you can touch set. We've already selected the correct stitch, so we didn't really need to go in and change that either, but just to explain some of the things that are happening. The next box up, this is really cool, so we can go in and we can adjust this. You have a dark, you have a medium, and you have a light. That's the background. Now this background is light, so you would think that we would go onto the light, which I'll do. But when we go into the light, it really doesn't illuminate as well as I would like it to. So I'm not going to, that's actually the medium, but let's go to the light. I'm not going to use the light on here. I find that just depending on what I'm working with, different things work out differently on fabrics. So you can play with that until you get the look that you want and you really want it to illuminate off of the fabric on there. So now that we have that on here, it really does kind of show me that that stitch can fit. It's going to be a really, really, really tight fit. So if I need to, I could go in and we could adjust that. Again, we could do it down here, but I'm going to show you on your screen another way to adjust it. Instead of adjusting the width independent from the length, if I was to adjust this, I would want it to be adjusted proportionally. So I'll show you how to do that adjustment proportionally. But the next thing that we're going to do is we'll show you that adjustment, and I also then want to turn on my laser, my guideline, and I want to show you how I've decided to use that to make this work a little bit better for me. Now, my way is not the only way. I just know that I've tried a lot of different things, and I've found the least amount of visual aids that I have down on the fabric are better for me because they seem to get distracting. So I'm going to show you what I do and how it works, and hopefully that'll work out great for you as well. Okay, so if I wanted to go in and I wanted to size this proportionally, I'd go into my stitch attributes, and then we can go in. There's a little lock. It looks like a kind of a chain down here at the bottom. I can move and touch that. So when I select that, what it's going to do, it's going to lock on here. You'll see an icon that comes up, and it shows that same icon, and it's showing the width and the length. So now when I adjust the width or the length, either one, both of them are adjusted proportionally. So we could do that, and as we're adjusting them on here, just so you guys know, you would be seeing those adjustments made on your fabric. So when you're doing that, you can go ahead and test that out. So once we know that the size is what we need it to be, the next thing that I do is we're going to turn on our guideline. So we're going to turn that on. And remember, the last time that we had that turned on, it came up and it had the grids. So if we were to look over here, we still have our grids showing on the fabric, along with the guideline, which is the main line, that red line in the center, and our stitches. So we can have all of these things showing at once. But here's what I want to do. I find that the grids, it used to be I would keep the grids on, but I find that the grids can be distracting. I even find that the stitch can be distracting for me. So what I like to do is I like to go in and I take on here and I choose a side, whichever side is the, I feel like is the straightest. I pick a side, and what I do is I go in, I'm in the sub menu right now, and I want to turn off the sub menu. When I turn it off, let's go back over here so you can see. So I'm about to push that off button, and you're going to see the changes that are made. So the sub is the grid, so we're going to turn that off. When I turn that off, the grid goes away. We still have the main line, which is the line, the stitch line that's running down the center right now. And we still have our projection of our stitch that we're working with. So now we're going to go back over to the screen. And in here, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the main section. And what I want to do, I'm going to watch right here this line. Now, some of you, when you were doing your grids, you may have ran into, when you were doing your little sample grids, you may have ran into where your red line or the main line, it could be red, it could be green, it could be white, but I switched mine to red, where it didn't line up with where your needle was. If that was the case, then you would need to move this either left or right down here, okay? This would lengthen that red line or shorten it, depending on what you place onto there, as far as the position, how far away it is from the foot. We're gonna leave it at 0, 0 right there on that. But what I am going to do, I'm going to take that red line and I want to move it to the left of my pattern because I'm choosing a section on the pattern to reference. Now, once we get it there, so I want it just to the outside edge of that. So I'm going to slide that in and we're just barely to the inside edge. And so if we were to look at our fabric now, so let me move you back over to the fabric so you can see that. Fabric, we have our main line that's in the red, and then we have the blue. This is where this starts to get confusing for me. And let me just show you. I'm going to slide this over to the side because I'm going to keep those grids open so I can stitch in there. But these lines are going to move as we quilt or as we sew. So watch what I mean by that. This whole projection is going to move with the movement of the stitch. And a lot of times what I find is if I'm watching the stitch and it's inside my channel, I have a tendency to try and keep it matched up. And it's not going to happen. Let me just put it in the channel so you can see what I mean by that. There is an option to go back to the beginning of your stitch, and I'll show you guys next time I go over onto the main screen how to do that. But what I would do is I would start off with this how it is. So I just move that main line, which is my red line, to the left side. Because I chose the left side of my reference, and I also moved the line down to match that left side. What's going to happen is, as I'm stitching this, you're going to see on here, this is all going to be moving as I go. And so that can get distracting to me. So as I go through, it's going to look like it's going to get off. You can see it looks like it's going to go outside. And that's where I start to kind of panic and try to make adjustments on my fabric. In reality, it's not moving the actual stitch over. It's just moving because the projection is stationary. It's your fabric that's moving. So the projection looks like it's moving to a different spot. So here's what I like to do now that I've got that down on there. I like to turn off, so I'm going to touch the cone shape. So I'm going to turn off the cone, and what I should do is bring you back to the screen so you can see this. It'll make a little more sense. So I'll turn the cone back on so you can see where we left off. Here's where the stitch is, and it's illustrating. So we're going to slide back over to the screen of the machine. On the screen of the machine, there's the icon that we turned on the stitch with. This is the one that I just deactivated, and that's what turned it off. So we're going to turn off that little cone. When we do that, the lights come back up. So the lights dim down for the projection to work. So now we've got those lights that are on there, and it's really kind of hard to see that line, but the line is there. What I like to do is I make some changes on the fabric, which we can do. Not the fabric, but the settings to illuminate that a little bit more. But the next thing that we're going to do is I want to show you in your stitch attributes, again, the icon under the house, there's an icon with a needle, a star, a heart, and a star. That's your pattern begin. So if I wanted to always go back to the beginning of the pattern, which in the project, every time I do a new row, I go back to the beginning, you just touch that, and that will take you back to the beginning of that pattern. So we're always starting from the same spot by touching that icon there. Now, if I really want that line to illuminate, I really want it to stand out strong, I can go into settings and I can scroll over and remember to page 4. And remember, light is always going to be a factor when you're trying to project something. So the more light you have, maybe you don't want to be completely off, it's up to you. I'm going to turn it off just so for you guys, I think you'll be able to see it a lot better. But the light's going to be turned off. Now when I look over here, the light is turned off. I'm going to go in and I'm going to turn my grid back on. And that's the pocket with the little laser kind of symbol. And when we do that, I'm going to move this camera so you can see this a little bit better. But when we make that change on there, what's going to happen is you're really going to see this illuminate on, or the line on the fabric. So I'm about to turn the grid line back on, which you'll see that pop on fairly quickly. And there it is. So now we can really see that. So my goal in this now, you guys, my goal is to take that left line and line it up with, on this particular fabric, with the lines that I created. Now remember what those lines are illustrating. Those lines are illustrating, let me grab our sample from before, or the ones that we're working on. So that line is actually illustrating the area in here to the inside of that stitch line there. Not directly in the middle, you want it to the inside because that was the measurement that we used when we drew our grid lines, right? So I want this line basically to stay parallel. Now it might sometimes go on the right, it might sometimes go on the left. That's okay. I want it to stay parallel with that. If it's not parallel, so if we're doing this and that line seems to keep moving around, which it will because it's really not the line moving, it's the fabric that's shifting around. But as this is stitching, what's going to happen is I don't want that line to ever look like this or like this. It can look like this, which is still parallel. It can look like this, which is still parallel. That's okay. What we're going to do is, and I'll show you, we'll just start stitching. I'll move it down a little bit so you can see. So I've started with the line on there. We're going to put the foot down. And with really, really, I'm going to say light hands. You don't need to do a lot of guiding on here. It's just not that necessary. I do like to turn down the speed on the machine, so you can do that if that's something that's going to make you more comfortable. But now I'm just going to keep that line kind of parallel. So you can see when it comes back over, if it's lining up, it's going to be pretty darn good. And again, it can go a little bit to the left, it can go a little bit, well, it's going to go a lot on this particular design to the right. Sometimes it'll go a lot to the left. But all you're doing is you're keeping that line in a line with the left side. And if you do that, then you should be able to stay inside those channels. So we're going to take a look at this, and if we like it and we feel comfortable, then we go for it. And I think it's perfect. So if you look, forget where the line is right now. I can slide it over so it doesn't confuse anyone. We kept that line parallel on that side, and so it kept it right inside our channel. Now, if I felt the need to go in and do this again and test sew that, I would do it again on here and on here until I get that movement right, and until I get that guiding correct from my end. I don't find that to be necessary for me. I've done this enough times with this particular project that I'm comfortable. So we're going to go in and we are going to get that set and in between the twin needle that we've already stitched. So I'm going to do that. I'll switch over, I'll pull the fabric up, we'll get that going and show you how we accomplish that. But again, use this to get comfortable. And that line, it can go to the left a little bit, it can go to the right a little bit. What it can't do is it always needs to stay parallel, not rotate and cross like this. Here. So I'm going to get this line lined up in between those. We are going to take, and I'm going to put my needle down. It's a little harder for me to see right now because I have the lights off, so you guys can see this a little bit better. But now I'm just to the inside of this. I'm going to put the foot down. I'm at the very start, and if I wanted to, I could also, they say when you use directional feet, and that's what this is, that's where the fabric moves left and right, that the pattern stop doesn't always work. However, I found that sometimes it does, so I'm going to give it a shot. We still have our pattern, the stop setting to stop when we're in front of it. So I'm going to place this just kind of down here in the middle because that's where we're going with it anyway. And down across the line, the bold line across the stitch line, just like before. I'm not going to aim towards that at all. I'm just putting it there so I can turn it on. So now when you look over here on my screen, I will come over here just so you can see this. Down at the bottom, we have the icon. We're going to turn that on. And we can decide, do we want it to shorten the stitch normally? Well, in pattern, when we're doing a pattern that has directional feed, it doesn't allow it. That's why it's grayed out. So it's grayed out, which is how it's going to be. So it's just going to stop wherever it sees that endpoint. And we're okay with that. So now, we're going to take, and I've got that little laser turned on. Now, one thing that won't work, you guys, is if you try to have your projector, which is the cone shape icon, with the stitch, you can't have endpoint setting, pattern end, endpoint setting, and that turned on at the same time. You can have your grids turned on or your subline. So we're going to go for it. So now I've got that line on there. I'm going to take this. I'm just going to make sure that line stays basically pretending I have another line on here. So we're going to kind of keep it parallel. See how we do. I'm in a little tricky angle, but it's going to be fine. So I'm just going to go in and I'm just going to let that stitch. And again, I'm letting the machine do the feeding. And I'm just making sure that that line doesn't cross on that left side. It's really that's really the important part. It's slowing down, and the reason why is it's saying, hey, pattern ends, so we're going to remove our sticker. And again, it doesn't work with all the stitches, but I'm going to try it anyway. And then we're going to go in and we're going to stitch this. We're going to continue stitching. And it now knows where the end is supposed to be. So we're going to let it just do its thing. And there it goes. It's cutting that stitch off perfectly. So I can go in, we can do our little tie-in and our trim. So here's what we're going to do next. We're going to go in. If you look, it fit perfect. It's right inside there. It's exactly how we want it to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go do all four corners. Then I'll come back and show you the other one. It works the exact same. I'll just show it to you so you have a little refresher. And then the last thing that we need to do is kind of get into the other areas. But I'm going to finish these four and actually do these 4. I'll do these 3 times the next stitch so it's already ready. Then I'll show you how we put that in. So what I did, you guys, is I went through and I did, as I said, I would do all of these different points. I then switched to the next set of stitching, which is the stocking and the star. And so I left one open so I can do one more. So all of these are done. So like these 2 are done. This is the present, and then the candy cane, star, and the stocking, present and candy cane, star and stocking, present and candy cane, star and stocking, present and candy cane, and I left one open to do the star and the stocking. So my process it doesn't change. The width of these is still the same. I went onto my scrap piece of fabric again, and I set it up the same way. So the difference is I selected the new stitch. So I have my new stitch selected in here, and then we went in, so that's stitch 854 in characters and decoratives. And then I made sure that the laser was set up where it needed to be, that guideline. And I did my sample or my test out on here. And again, it worked out really, really well. So I felt really comfortable going and finishing those other 3 areas on the quilt. So the process, really quickly, I just want to show you the screen and just make sure everybody's still comfortable with that. So on the screen, what we did is we went in and we just picked stitch number 854. So that's the stocking and then the star. So we selected that stitch. And then we went into our guidelines, which is that little laser up top. And once we did that, this is where we can adjust it. On the main line, because that's what we're working with, again, remember you can adjust it left or right. And that moves it in, and you can see that. We just adjusted it to the left. It actually didn't need really any adjustment from the last stitch. They're basically the same width and work the same. So that was the adjustment that we made. And then, of course, we took and went onto our fabric and kept that line just perfect over there. So when we look at the fabric, we'll kind of zoom in on that just a little bit. We just kept that line perfect on the stitch line and let it go all the way down. And really it just needs to be parallel, right? It can go this way, it can go this way. What it can't do, like I said before, it just can't cross. So that's what we did on there to get the stitches perfect. And so I'm going to grab our project and then we will finish that last little section and then we'll move on to the combinations. I put my sticker on. I didn't use the sticker on all of them and then realized maybe it was a better idea to use that. I did put it a little bit higher, so above the line. That way it didn't accidentally overrun, because it did have a few spots where it overran. Again, when you're using these directional feed stitches, there's no guarantee that this is actually going to work with that pattern stop. So you have to be a little bit understanding of that. I am going to make sure I go back to the beginning of the stitch, which I am now at. And I'm going to line it up with the seam on the side. It's lined up. This is in good position here. And we could tie it in with that little knot feature that's on the machine, same one that's the tie off at the end. So I didn't mention that before, but I have been doing that. So now we're going to take, and all I'm going to do is keep this, again, the same way to that edge over there. And we're just letting the machine do this on its own. It's coming towards that, so it's now recognizing and it's slowing down. When you use these directional feed, they take longer when you have the pattern end on there. So it may be a decision that you say, oh, I'll just kind of watch this a little bit careful and not worry about the pattern ending for me. I'll end it myself. Because as you notice, it does take quite a bit longer when it's doing these directional feed stitches. And that's because it's thinking about, well, how am I really going to make this land and be perfect when it's feeding all these different directions. So it stopped. It's telling me to take off the sticker. So the sticker has been removed, and now we can stitch this through. And we're just going to kind of watch and make sure that it goes in, and as it gets a little closer, it's going to slow down. And all I'm looking for is I want to make sure that it doesn't pass up that spot. And we're pretty darn close to moving forward. It's now turning off, saying, hey, we see something. So we're going to let it do its thing. And it's coming to an end. Now it's starting to overrun, and that's the only thing that I worry about when I do these directional feed stitches with pattern end. It didn't actually end that as well as I wanted it to, so I'm going to manually stop and end that. And there, it did overrun that a little bit, so I may have to adjust that down. But that's going to get all of my little stockings and stars and all those little things in there. So the last thing that we're going to do, not the last, but the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put together, I'm going to go in and do a one pattern repeat into here. It's 100% me just eyeballing that as far as the ending point. So I'm not using pattern end on there. So I'll pick my design that I'm going to work with, and I'll tell you what stitch it is on the machine. Okay, so the next design that we're going to do is going to be 855, so it's just the next one over. And it's a little angel with a heart, and the heart's not going to fit into there. We're going to fit the angel in, and you'll see this on my sample. I originally wasn't going to do anything because it was such a small area, but then I said, let's try it, go for it. If you look on the screen right now, where the laser is going to align is going to be where it was left last time. And I do want to go in and I want to shuffle that to the left. Like I said, I pick a side, so it could be left or right, but I try to stay consistent. So I'm going to go all the way to the far outside of this. And so I'm basically just right on that wing or just to the left of that wing. So by doing that, that allows me to go into my fabric. So let's slide this over and get a better look at the fabric. But we're going to take this guy. And so now on my scrap piece, you're going to watch this, and this one's actually going to cross over quite a bit because it's much wider design. The last few weren't quite, not wider, but a lot more movement to the design. So now, if I were to go in, I would do the same process. I would still want to first go in and just make sure it's going to fit. So I would turn on my projector. Again, that's the little cone icon that's on your machine. So there's my projector, and there's the design showing up really well. So again, this one's barely going to fit. So if it were me, I would probably size that down just a little bit. So we can do that several ways, but one way that I would do it, because I would want it to be the same proportionally, is over on our machine, we had that option, and I can take you back over to that screen so you can see that. But we had the option on the screen of, if we went to stitch attributes, we're going to again call this the stitch attributes. When we click on that icon, we were going to go down at the very bottom. There's the little lock feature. That's going to lock the width and the length together. And so now the width and the length can be worked together. And so I'm going to switch it back over to the fabric so you can see the changes being made. And I really just want to get that really close to fitting inside there. Maybe not quite as cumbersome as it is. So I'm going to make that design, just bring it down just a little bit. So now we've brought that design down. And so the next thing that we're going to look at is maybe I want to also go in and maybe I do want to stretch that so I can unlock it. And if I want, I can just stretch that to make the angel a little bit longer. So really what I'm looking to do, if we were to put our sample fabric underneath, let me grab my sample that we're making, our project. So if we put our project underneath and we really want to see what we're trying to work with, and you have to remember that it's not exactly the same size and width, so you just kind of have to be understanding of that. So you may want to just do a little sample to make sure. But any adjustments that we make, we can look at and see how it's going to be. So you can adjust the length, you can adjust the width, you can adjust both blocks together. It's really up to you. You decide what you want to work with, and then go ahead and let's put that in there. But that's what we're going to work on. And so I already have the channel. These are my leftover channels from before. And because we just sized that down, we may want to move our main line on our screen. So if we move back over to the sewing screen, you can see that the main line is just a little bit to the left. So I'm going to go back in, and we're going to allow this to come up. And now I'm just going to move that main line back over towards the right. So I did size this maybe a little unproportionately. I made it longer and narrower. And I like the way it looks for me. You can decide what works for you. I've now set that up. I'm going to turn off because I don't want that distraction of that stitch on there when I'm trying to guide it. I just want the line, so I'm going to turn that off. And now we're going to go over and we're going to find on our fabric exactly what we're used to seeing. There's our line. And I'm going to place this, and we're going to start it right on the edge. So right on the line, and then we're going to start to sew. And all I'm looking for, again, is to keep that line parallel. Remember, it could go all the way on that other side. That's part of the deal. But our goal is to try to keep that as parallel as possible. So when that line comes in contact with the other line, the stitch line, we want it to be looking as parallel as possible or right on top. So we're just letting that go through. And after you've done a little bit on there, then maybe you're going to want to go in and you're going to stop and just take a look. And the goal really is just to stay between the channels. So as long as we're staying in between the channels, which we did pretty good there, got off a little bit here, then we're going to be okay. We're only going to do one of those, so it's not that big of a deal. We're going to make sure that we keep that one in there, and that's the stitch that we're going to put on there. So I'm going to get my project, and we'll get that set up, and then we'll come back and stitch it out. So after I did a few stitch outs, I decided I wanted to maybe make some changes to my design. And so I did adjust the width and the length, and I'll show you what I put mine at. But I really wanted to kind of point out really quickly the projection and just exactly how that is going to show. So my design that I have now, if you look, here's the stitch line and the heart goes below it. But that's where I'm saying this stitch projection can get skewed this way pretty drastically. So you really want to stitch things out to get a better understanding of the actual size. The width's pretty close. So right now, this design should fit really inside there the way that it is. So I have my line on the left, and then I have the stitching showing on there. Again, I'm going to turn off the stitching because I don't need that to be showing as I'm sewing, because I really just want that line in there to keep my focus on one thing. So another thing that I decided to do too that I thought would be appropriate to show you is I went in and turned on a function that is a single pattern. So again, in Stitch Attributes, there's a function underneath your pattern begin. There's a function that has 3 stars and then 1. If you toggle that back and forth, on the 3 stars, it's just continuous. If I touch that, it's saying just do the pattern one time. And so my current size that I'm at is down here at 14.4 at the bottom by 46.9, and that's the size that I thought felt the most comfortable to fit into there. So we're going to stitch that out after, again, doing just a few samples and playing with it. That's what I felt would be most comfortable. So we're going to bring you back over to the machine, and we're going to slide in here and get a nice stitch out going on. Now, all I'm concentrating on, you guys, is that left side, and just watching that and keeping it, again, somewhat parallel. So I'm going to tie in my stitches up top, so it's tying that in. So we just did a tie-in stitch, and now I'm just going to push on the foot control, and we're going to let it go down and do its thing. It's only going to do one design, and it's going to stop. And again, I just felt the size, and you can see it's coming down and it's going to stop for me. But the size worked out really good for my particular area, and yours should be pretty close to the same, but right into there. So I really like how it turned out. Maybe on yours you'll have the same look. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in, I'm going to do that on each of the blocks. So we've got 4 blocks, 4 corner pieces anyway, and this is done twice in each of the corner pieces. So again, I'm going to go to pattern begin. So I moved it to the pattern begin. I'm going to put the needle down just inside so it's on the line. We're going to drop the foot, and I actually need to slide this just a little bit forward, and hard to see maybe on camera. It's even tricky for me because I'm really stitching from the side of the machine. But now we've got that in there, and it's just going to do it one time. I'm going to tie the stitches in. It's going to lock those in, and then we're going to let the machine just stitch. I'm going to slow it down this time a little bit more. And again, that left side, it can go over that line. Your job is just to keep it parallel with those light hands, right? You're going to guide that really lightly with your hands. And there's my little heart. If I feel like it's a little bit short, I can just take a few stitches because it's just going to be a straight stitch, which is pretty darn close. And that's going to finish it off. And then we're going to cut. And there's my little angel with the heart. And I'm going to repeat that. Then we're going to come back and we're going to do the combination and move on to the next part in the project. Okay, first thing we're going to do is we're going to switch over from utility stitch. We're going to go into characters and decoratives. We are going to go into the 7 folder, and we're going to scroll down to stitch 775. So I'm just scrolling through here, and as soon as I find 775, we're going to select that stitch. It's going to bring it up on the screen. It does suggest that we use the end foot, which I have that on there right now. And the next thing that we're going to do, if I wanted to add a stitch to this, you can touch that plus, and what that does is it brings up our combination mode. So now as I scroll through here, and you'll know you're in the combination mode because it's going to have these little characters that come down. So now I can scroll to the next stitch, which is 7-100, so 7100. And notice how it put that design right into there for me. So that's what we're looking for. Now, there's something that I would change on here where it connects in that corner, maybe a little bit tricky to see, but it's not quite perfect. There's an icon up on top where you can actually touch, and it's directly under the Wi-Fi section. When I touch that icon, it will bring up your combination, and you can even zoom in and you can look at that. And this is what I'm talking about here. So I want to show you a function that you can go in and you can shift this. So if your thread is set to blue, which it defaults there, the light blue is the part of the design that you have selected. So right now I have the flower. Down at the bottom, we can adjust width and length, but really what I want to do is I want to shift this until that leaf just kind of lines up a little bit better in line with that section there. I can go back into here, we can zoom in, and now it really makes a nice line coming through. So the next thing that we're going to do, we're keeping this really simple, so I just wanted to point out the left and right shift. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go back in, and we are going to select the 775 again. So we have the exact same thing. Now what I want to do is going to be a little bit different because I want these to be a mirror image of each other. So what I want to do is I actually want to take this and we're going to mirror image it. So I'm going to go into my stitch properties section, and in here these are your mirror options. So if I were to touch this, it's going to flop that, and now the two of these are the same. So where it meets into the rose, I'm going to call it, or the flower, it comes out of the flower the same way. So that's the mirror image that I did. Now the issue that we may have is, do these really line up? Are they in the right spot? A little bit tricky to see. So here's a little trick that I would do. Because this design is not the exact same on both sides, I already know how that leaf matches with the design up here. So one thing that I can do is I can go, right now this is selected, I can move up one step. So now this is lighter, the lighter blue. I now have the little rose selected. And I can go in and just flop that the other way. So I'm going to mirror image it this way. And now I can look and we can see that this particular part would need to be moved up if we want it to be the exact same as the one up here. Because we know that this part of the design matches that part of the leaf perfectly. So with that said, I'm going to scroll down over here so I can grab a hold of that. So now I've grabbed a hold of that, and meaning this part, and I'm going to do another shift. And all I'm doing is lining that up to where it lines up just with the edge of that, just the same way. And we can go in and we can zoom and we can kind of look at this. That's how it hits. That's how that one's going to hit there. And I could leave the flower here if I want because I know they're on the same spot. Or I can go back in if you really prefer that the leaves are up here at the top. You can go back in now that we've decided that we've matched it up the exact same way if it were on that other side, and we can just take that mirror image off. So now that we've got those set, this is just a kind of a starting point. I always do sew outs just to make sure that it's correct. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to determine the size that we need to work this into. Now, my total, this is only down here. This is showing me the length and the width, but it's going to change every time I select a different part of the design. So as I scroll through here, this area is changing. I could go in though, and if I wanted to, which we do, I want to know the total size of this. So this icon here, that actually will grab all of the design and put it together. And so right now it says we're at 34.5 wide by 106.2 in length. Those are in millimeters. So you can measure out your area. I'm not really going to go that far. I'm going to use my grids to get kind of an idea. Really, I'm more concerned about the width than the length. But we're going to go in and take this as is. And what I'd like to do is I would like to save it. But before I do, I want to point out on here, in the stitch attributes, if you only want this to sew out one time as a combination, the little area that has the 3 stars, that would continue the design all the way through over and over and over again. But if we touch that and it switches it to 1, it's going to make that just a single pattern combination. So I'm not saying that this is exactly how we want it to be. We're going to sew it out and play with that. But I also think we're going to have to adjust what they call the balance. And everyone's balance is going to be different. Each machine has really its own way of feeding some of these directional feeds. So I don't want you to go off of exactly whatever I put in as far as the balance goes, but I do want you to see how that works. So we'll get into that when we do the stitch out. I'm going to take you over, well, before we do that, let's save it into memory. So down here, if I touch memory, it's saying, where do you want to save it? I want to save it into my machine. So when I touch that, it's now saved into the machine as a combination. So we're next going to go onto our fabric that we're working with, and we need to decide, the width of this so we can create the channels. And when I say the width... Okay, so I have the project in here, and I'm really not going to switch back and forth between the screen too much because I think we've done that. So now what we're doing is we're just measuring, the distance between these center pieces here. So I am going to turn my grids on, and that's going to be the little pocket with the laser looking icon up on top there. So I'm going to set everything to zeros because I really want you to see how I work with this. 0 in the main line, so maybe I will just switch this back over. I wasn't intending to do that, so we'll switch it back over. Okay, so back on my screen, I touched this icon, it opened up guidelines, they're on. On the main line, I'm going to put this at 0, and I had it switched over, just kind of working on a different part of the project for a moment. I'm going to put this at 0. That puts it right at the middle. So that puts the laser, the mainline laser is going to be, or projection line is going to be at the center. And I never really explained before the difference between these two. If you go with the circle, that's just showing you where it's the needle drop. So that's what that is, but I want the line. So now I've moved that over. So now when we look, we're going to have our laser lined up in the center, which is what we want. So that's what we did over here. So the next thing that we're going to do on this screen is I'm going to go in and we're going to go into our subline. So once we go into the subline, and right now I have the sublines on green, which is great, I'm going to turn on my grids. And this is where we can go in and we can adjust. Now I'm going to be using the plus and the minus. I'm going to switch the camera over to the fabric so you can maybe see those a little bit better. So now we're on the fabric with the grid line, and as you can see right now it's a little bit narrow. I really want that grid line to match just the edges of this, because I'm going to use that to create a sample that I can sew on and really test things out. So I'm going to take the bottom line and first line it up with that seam because that's a pretty straight seam. And now I'm going to, on my machine, that's where I left you off last, I was going to adjust those grid lines until they touch the whites. So once they start to touch the whites, which they're doing now, I'm going to take, and even if I have to rotate it and not keep it perfectly straight, I just need to make sure it's in there. That's really the measurement that I have to work with. Now, I don't want any of this to go outside the whites. We're pretty comfortable where we're at. So once we do that and we make that change or that measurement, now what we're going to do is we're going to sew on a scrap piece of fabric. So I'm going to go in, get that sewn down on the scrap piece so I know my width that I can work in, and then we can kind of go from there. Okay, so I went in and I sewed this out just like we did last time. So I did a straight stitch. So let's just say I did this line first. If I sewed that line first, then I would go in and I would move 2 over. So here's the line. I'm moving it 2 over from the center. I have the center and I switched that to be a white color. So you guys can hopefully see that a little bit better on the camera with the black. So now I would take this and I would just slide this over. So that line is on the second line. This line is right down the center, and we're going to stitch that, and that's what I did all the way across. I just went 2 over, stitch, 2 over, and stitch. So now I have several channels that I can do my practice sew outs with. The next thing that I want to do is, so right now my design is centered. I didn't shift it, meaning when we made the design, we didn't change it from the center position. So when I go to stitch it out, I want to sew from the center, but here's now where things get a little tricky. Our design is much narrower than this opening or this width. So because it's narrower, we're dealing with a wider width that we have to still keep everything lined up to. I actually don't mind that. I prefer it because it gives you a little bit more room to, if you're off, to compensate for. But I still don't like the distractions of all these extra things. So here's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to switch you over to the screen. Actually, again, I'm not going to switch you over. I'm just going to tell you. We've done this enough times at this point. On my screen, the guideline, I would have that opened up. So again, it's the pocket with the little laser looking icon. We're going to go into the guidelines, and on my subline, I'm now going to turn off the, well, we'll leave that on. Let's go into the main line first. Let's start with the main line. On the main line, there's at the bottom where it says main line position, I'm going to move, so I'm hitting the minus because that moves it to the left. I'm moving that white line over. Now, something that's really important, let's move it back to the center. So I'm putting it at 0, 0, 0. When we first do this, one thing that I did not do that I should have is I would go in and I would make sure that this is lined up right there perfectly. So I'm going to put the foot down. So now we know that we're dead center with where we're at. And that way your fabric doesn't move as you're moving the main line over. Now I'm going to go in that main line positioning, I'm going to shift that main line, which is the white line. And understand when you shift the main line, it also shifts the entire grid. But we're going to shift that main line because with the foot down, we're holding this fabric in place. It's in center. Now we're going to shift that all the way to the left. So again, I'm choosing left. I could have just as easily chose the right. It's not a preference. I'm just trying to keep things consistent. So once I get that line lined up perfectly on there, now I can turn off the grid. The main line stays on, so it's not the guideline that we're turning off. We're leaving that on. We're going to go into subline, and that's where you would turn off the grid. So the grid is now turned off. A little tricky to probably see this in the camera because of it's right on top of the thread, but I'll move it over so you can see this. So now there's our white line. And our goal when we stitch this out is the same as before. It's going to keep that line from going like this or like this at times. We're going to just try to keep it so it's parallel. So even if it comes all the way over here, parallel, parallel, and so forth. That's the goal as we stitch this through. So I'm going to go over now to my machine. I already have the design pulled up and ready that we saved. So we're going to go in, and I'm not even going to use the foot control. I'm going to just use the start and stop button because that's going to allow me to stay away from the camera a little bit. I'm going to move this over to the edge. Let's go to this one here just so I have some space to work with a little bit easier. So I've got the line, and we're going to, as long as I put that line right on top of those stitches, then that's going to put the needle and everything right in the middle. Because again, we measured and set that line originally from that center position. So here's our line that we're going to be working with. We're right on top of it. And so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to just stitch this out. Now, there's going to be the first stitch out will not probably be perfect because you're going to need to make some adjustments to what we would call the balance. And that's the way that the stitches move around left and right and also forward and back. So sometimes your big decorative stitches, they're not going to match up and they're not going to line up. And you can adjust that if you take some time and put in a little bit of effort. Now remember, I have this set as just a one pattern dill, so it's only going to do one pattern. I accidentally turned off the laser, so let's turn that back on. So there's my laser. I'll slide it over so you can see. So we're in alignment right now. So I'm going to touch my start key, and again, all I'm doing is I'm keeping that laser in the parallel position with our line. So we're going to go in. And we're just going to stitch that out. So as it comes back to that line, it looks pretty close to parallel. Now again, this isn't going to be perfect. And I know that because I've stitched this out already, so I know what's going to happen. And I do find that I have to stitch sometimes, especially these combinations, where they end up with multiple directional feed on them. Sometimes you have to stitch them out 4, 5, 6, 7 times to get this right. So we're just letting it go through and do its thing. And sometimes you'll find the design has a tendency to pull to the left or pull to the right or not feed far enough forward, or on the reverse stitches it doesn't close up certain areas. So that's what we're going to watch for this first go round. And again, it usually takes 2, 3, sometimes 4 attempts till we get this just right. So we're letting the machine just do its thing, and we're trying to keep that as parallel as possible. And it will stop when it's done. And some of you are, not going to be comfortable this way. You could turn on all your grids, but again, so you have more reference points. But I really feel like the more reference points that I have personally, it's just sensory overload. It's too much, and I have a hard time really keeping everything together. So we're almost complete, and when we're done, we're going to look at this and we're just going to say, okay, does that look like where we want things to really land? So we're going to go in, we're going to hit our trim, and we're going to take a look. It's actually not bad at all. I could have held that thread to begin with. And when I say it's not bad, it fits inside that area. Now, I don't know, we're going to try and see if we can show this on camera as well as I have it in front of me. It's a little hard to see on this camera, but what's happening right now is there's a few areas that I think we need to kind of clean up. One is the height. So if you look on this side, and again, it might be tricky on the camera to see, it's almost like, it's not almost, it is. The design is coming and it's sewing, but by the time it comes, it drifts down here to the right. So when it was in here, that would be the right side. So it's coming down, it's actually drifting not to the right when we put it the right way. It's drifting and it's drifting to the left. So the left is having a tendency to maybe sit down a little bit further. The other thing that I'm noticing is this doesn't really close up the way that it should. If we look at that on the screen, that particular part of the design is really closed up on that flower. So we know that there's a little bit of a balance issue. So we're going to go in and play with the balance just a little bit and see if we can't get it to work out. Let's really look at this and just again see what we have. So if we were looking at this, and I've got that line kind of on there, it looks like this section is just slightly to the left. And then also this is opened up on here. So it's almost like on the reverse when it's coming back, it's not closing all the way like we would want it to do. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go onto our screen and we're going to take you into a new area that you have not really explored. And we're going to get you a little more comfortable with the balance. So we're back onto our screen. I'm going to close this out. This is where we were in our guidelines. And we're going to go into settings. Now, if I scroll over, and the balance is going to actually be when I scroll over, let's see, was it on page? It was actually on page 1. We don't even have to scroll over. So on page 1, you've got fine adjust vertical and fine adjust horizontal. So let's just kind of think about what we were working with on here. We had our design that we were trying to work with. And again, it kind of shifted, it was stitching in an angle this way. So I really need it to shift back to the right a little bit. So let's work with that one first. That's the horizontal, left and right. So if I were to go in to the positive side being the right, negative side being the left. So I'm going to, it's at 0, 0 right now. I'm going to give it a positive, let's go 2. Actually, let's really change this so you guys can see it. I'm going to make it a 9. It's going to be totally off, but I want you to see what happens. So we're going to go with the 9 on here so you can see that, and we won't do anything with the vertical. I'm going to stitch out a 9 on the positive, and then I'll do the same thing with the vertical so you guys can see how the sample works out, and then we'll get it fine-tuned. Okay, we're back onto our fabric, and remember we made that a positive 9 on the horizontal. So I'm going to line the line up just like normal. We already know that it's perfectly centered from that spacing based off of how we set it up before. We're going to go in and I'm going to do the same thing on the line. I'm going to speed up the stitching a little bit. I already know this isn't going to be perfect because I made a major adjustment by moving it all the way to the 9. But I want you to see what happens. And you know, sometimes you can just make those major adjustments. That way you can just verify, did I go in the right direction? So right now, I already know it's really starting to feed this more towards the right. Whereas last time it was feeding on an angle more towards the left. So I know I was going in the positive direction to solve my problem. However, it's too much. So I'm not going to let this stitch all the way out because it's so much that it's actually going all the way over into the other area. And that's just the machine feeding it because of that change that we made. I'm going to go back into my settings, and on page 1, I'm going to go to Fine Adjust Horizontal. And now we're going to go to where I think it's more appropriate, either a 1 or a 2, because it really wasn't off very, very far. So I'm going to put the Fine Adjust Horizontal at a 2. And then I'm going to go to Pattern Begin in my Stitch Attributes, Needle, Star, Heart. I'm going to turn back on my laser. And I'm going to go underneath this, actually. And we're going to stitch just underneath it. And now the line's on there. Now we're at a positive 2, not a positive 9. So watch the difference that it's going to make in the design. It's a small change that I made, but again, we were really close. It wasn't that far off. So we're going to see if that small change adjusts everything that we needed to adjust. We know that it was feeding on an angle because the height of the same designs, meaning the first design and the third design that we put in there, which are identical, the height of the first one was higher than, or more to the right than the one on the second one. So we're going to let it stitch this out, and we're going to see if that solves our issues. And if it does, then we're done. If not, then we can work on the vertical as well, because that looked like it's possible the vertical was off. I would always adjust one and then the other, not two things at the same time, because you really never know what's solving your problem. And if you have to keep adjusting, you want to know what you're adjusting for. We're pretty darn close. So the vertical isn't off very, very much. So this did now shift, and again, it might be hard to see in the camera, but this did shift. These two lines are really close to being matched up now. And the gap that was created on the flower is definitely improving. So now we have just a really minor gap that's on there between those leaves and the flower. Whereas before, we had a really big gap. You can see those leaves on there on that left side. They're really separated from the flower. So making that one, now that we've tested out the horizontal and we feel pretty comfortable with where we are there, I want to go back in and we're going to change the balance on the vertical. Understand that changing the balance on the vertical may not be necessary. There is that element of me guiding the fabric that could be, maybe not closing that gap as equally as we would like it to be. But we're going to go in, we're going to make changes, and we're doing all this just on our scrap piece of fabric. So it's not like we're stuck with any one setting. We're going to find what works best for us and then go from there. So when I come back into the screen, I'm always going to go to Pattern Begin. So I'm at the beginning of the pattern. We're going to go up to Settings, And right now our fine adjustment, we left it at a +2, which again, I think is really good. And then we've got our fine vertical adjustment. So we're gonna go into there, and because the gap needed to be closed on our sample, what we're trying to close is that gap may be in there. And again, it looks really good, so I don't know that it's that big of a deal, but we really need this to shift this way, back. So positive on the vertical would be going forward, negative would shift things towards the back. So I'm going to go in and we're going to adjust that. And again, I like to do it in increments of 2. So we're at 0 right now. I'm going to go -2. That'll push it back in that 2 direction. And we're going to check it out and see what it looks like. We're going to touch OK. We're going to turn our laser back on. And remember, that's going to be the main line. And then we're going to move on to the fabric, stitch that out, see how it looks, and then... Okay, so I'm on my sample piece of fabric. I've got the little main line there, so I'm going to slide that over, line it up, and that's on that line there. Again, that's going to put us in the center of these channels based off of that measurement that we did earlier. So now I'm going to go in and we're going to stitch this out, and we're going to see how it lines up, both with the horizontal of a +2, meaning we pushed it to the right a little bit, and then the vertical we went -2. So we're going to go in, we're going to let the machine do its thing, and I'm just concentrating on that left side, just keeping that, again, parallel. I really don't even look at the stitching as it's happening, because then I notice that I have a tendency to want to make adjustments to the stitching. But the hard part with that is you don't know when it's going to move left or when it's going to move right again, or forward or backwards for that matter. So that's again why I like to just look at that line on the left. It just gives me one area that is my job to concentrate on. And then with those light hands, I'm just letting the machine go through and letting it stitch this out. And then once it's done, we'll see where we ended up, and if everything's good, we'll go on to our project and we'll start to stitch it out. So you might have to do this more than once. You know, it might be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitch outs. Just whatever you need to do to get comfortable to go onto your project. And remember, if something happens, if there's a mistake, you're really the only one that's going to notice that. You're the one that's really close to the project and the situation. So we're going to go in, we're going to take a look. And it really didn't make that change that I was looking for on that vertical. You can still see there's a little bit of an opening, but I feel pretty comfortable with where we're at. So I'm actually going to move this back down for my stitch out, meaning I'm going to move it back out to where on the vertical we're really at a 0 again. So we're going to be at a +2 on the horizontal, and then I'll be at a 0 on the vertical. Yours could be completely different numbers. Each machine is going to be individual. And so again, I would just recommend that you go in and you try it out, and nobody's really going to be concentrating on that. So I wouldn't stress over that. I think it's going to look really, really awesome. So I am going to switch my thread. I'm going to get onto my project. We're going to get this part done so we can move on to the next area of the project. So I have my project in place. I did lengthen the overall design. So my length of the total design is going to be at 116.7 in length and then 34.5 in width. We're going to see how that looks. But I've got the design ready to go. Everything's set. I've got my line lined up with here because, again, that was the measurement, which puts us in center of here. We can go in and we can do a lock-in stitch. I guess I should make sure I'm on the line that I want to be on. So we've got that locked in. And once it's done locking in, I'm just going to keep that line, you guys, right down that side. I'm a little angled right now, at least from what I can see. But we're going to go for it and get this finished up so we can move on to that next part. And again, I'm just looking over here and watching that side and keeping that parallel with those edges. That's really my goal. And I can see it on both sides of the twin needle stitching. So as it transfers over, I can kind of look at that and see am I where I need to be. Now, I may have lengthened my design a little bit too long. Normally what I do is I would cut that design out of my sample and just check and make sure that it's the right length. I'm going to angle this back just a little bit because I want to get more towards this corner. I would make sure that you don't have anything behind your machine or give it some room to move. And sometimes we don't give our machine enough space to do the work. And again, if it's not perfect, this is your first, real attempt at it. Right there, I just got caught up just a little bit on kind of holding the fabric from moving forward so it couldn't advance. So I've got a little bit of area to come out onto here. So I'm just going to go into utility stitch and I'm going to select my straight stitch and I'm going just to stitch a straight stitch just out to that point. And we'll get it there and then we're going to tie it off. And it's not perfect, but it's not bad. I feel comfortable with it. I'm going to go with it. Right there, you can see where I started to maybe guide it not as smoothly as it needed to be. But again, you guys, I don't think anybody's going to go in and look at this particular sample and really pick it apart. You're the one that's going to know that. So I'm going to go in. We're going to get all 4 sides done. And then we will move on to the next, which is going to be doing a hand quilted stitch on there and let it go down. I might adjust the length and just play with the length in here. Just for fun and see what different lengths I can work in. And again, I'm not too worried about this, being my perfect sample. I'm really here to learn. Hopefully that's what I'm instilling in you, is just wanting to learn how to use your machine and then get more. As you use it more, you're going to get more comfortable with it. So we'll get that other side done and then we'll meet back and move to the next. So I finished my last one, and by the time I got to the 4th one, I feel pretty good with where things ended up. And so this is my 4th one, and I'll kind of show you the size that I went with. And again, you can decide what works for you. You can lengthen it or make it a little bit shorter. But I do want to show you something. As I was working through here, going back and forth, meaning I was adjusting lengths and trying different things. I made, 2 corners I went really short on, and I can show you those mistakes. But it's just something that I was playing with. And again, usually I would do that on my sample piece and then, perfect it before I go in and really do that. I wasn't thinking about the length. But if I'm going to toggle back and forth between a straight stitch, for instance, and my created pattern, I would go in and save those. You're going to save your combination first. And to retrieve the saved combination, I don't know that I went back and explained this. I'm going to go into Character and Decoratives, and then I scroll over. There's a pocket. So as you scroll over, there's a pocket in here as your option. When I touch that, those can be my saved combinations. These are all different sizes that I tried. And again, they weren't perfect because I was just kind of experimenting. One of them was extremely small. So if you look, this one isn't even close to being right on. I was just super tiny in there. So I made it too small, so I had a big run out stitch there. So you can play with that. And again, I wouldn't worry so much. This is, again, something for you to get comfortable with these stitches. But I really like by the end on this corner here, it really turned out well. And went up to that edge piece and just laid in really nice. So I am going to put on my Move It or the digital dual feed foot. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to get our monofilament thread. We're going to put that up in the top, and then I want to go through and just do a couple stitches of the hand quilted stitch for you and utilizing that stop pattern as well. So I'm going to get the machine ready, and then I'll come back, we'll show you the settings, and then we'll move on to that next part in the project. So we're now ready to put in the hand quilted stitch. And so we're going to go into utilities, and we're going to slide over. There's a S section, that's for specialties. The H stands for hand quilted, and there's 3 different settings that you can go on. I'm going to use the middle one, but you can test these out, play with them. They're just how close the stitches are per inch, or how many stitches per inch are placed into there. So I'm going to select that second one in. Now there are some things that I like to do, and you can kind of decide on this. I like to switch the bobbin case. So we've been using the sewing bobbin case this whole time, and I like to switch that bobbin case to being the embroidery bobbin case. And the difference between the two, let's just sneak over to the machine on here, but the difference between the two, and you can see I have my dual feed foot on there, or digital dual feed. But the difference between the two is one of them is made to be adjustable, while the other one is set for you to leave as a sewing bobbin case. So the one that's adjustable is the one that has on the inside, we'll see if we can get that on the camera. Yeah, you can see that little dot just on the inside. It's a little hard to see. But there's a little blue dot on mine. There we go, on the inside of that bobbin case. That is your embroidery bobbin case. That's the one that you would adjust. And on the side, there's 2 screws. There's one that's a Phillips or a star head, and then there's a flathead screw on the side of your bobbin case. And so when we are going to adjust this, we're going to adjust one of those screws. And it's going to be the flathead screw. And so this screw that's right into here, I'm going to make an adjustment, either loosen or tighten. I like to loosen it. When I do my hand quilted stitch, I like a loose bobbin, because what's going to happen is it's actually, to create the stitch, you're using monofilament thread on the top, which is a clear thread. And then in the bobbin, you're going to put the color that you want to show through. That means the machine is going to pull up your bobbin thread. Basically, every other stitch is what it looks like. So I'm going to switch this out. There's a lever on here that will lift up the throat plate. We're going to pull your bobbin out. I did wind some green into a bobbin that I'm going to put in with this bobbin case. And so when we put this back in, just make sure that you get it in correctly, and we go over that in the regular customer course classes. So we want that bobbin in correctly. Sorry, that bobbin case. Now we're going to switch. I'm going to make sure that I put my green thread in. And I didn't actually make the change on the tension, so let's do that. So before we go too far, I'm going to just take, and the screw that's in there, I'm just going to loosen it. So we're going to rotate it counterclockwise, so to the left. And we'll make a couple adjustments possibly. And on a bobbin case, if you barely turn the screw, that's a major adjustment, because think of the diameter of that. It's really small. So I did almost a full turn, which is a pretty big adjustment. And the idea is I want it loose enough that it can really pull that bobbin through to the top of the fabric. And you may not have to adjust yours at all. It just really depends. But for the project, and to go pull up through those 3 layers, being the backing, the batting, and the top, I find that I need to make that adjustment until we get it to where it'll pull through just right. So I'm going to grab my scrap fabric, and then we're going to do a couple little stitch outs and make sure that everything's good, and then we'll go to our project. Okay, so I have my scrap fabric on here. So the needle's going to be to the left. If I wanted to, I could turn on my, my grid. And again, you guys remember, hopefully from all of the work that we've been doing, our line is actually over here. That's my main line. If I want to line that up so I know exactly where I'm going in relation to my needle, if I look at my needle, it lines up basically with the inside red that's on that foot. There's some lines that are on that dual feed foot, and that needle lines up with that inside little red line that's on there. So I'm going to just slide, moving my main line. I'm going to move it over until it also matches that red line. And you'll see it, the line itself, you'll see it projecting even onto the foot. So really easy to do. And so there's no need to move my needle over to the center. You actually are going to get a better stitch out if it's in that position there. So I would just move that line so I know where I want to guide it with. So we have that set. We're also, when we do the project, we're going just for practice, we're going to go in and we're going to put on that new pattern stop function. But let's get this stitched out so you can see what it's going to look like. I'm just going to touch the start button. Different than most hand quilted stitches that machines do, this one is always moving forward. Now, a lot of machines, they have to do what they call a reverse motion. That means they have to go forward and backwards to draw up that bobbin thread. This really is an awesome feature that they've come up with because it allows us to not worry about reverse motion feed. So we can even turn corners with this stitch and make it look really smooth. So my tensions, I'm really happy with the look that I'm getting on there. So right now, this is what it looks like as a hand quilted stitch. Let's see if we can get this camera to see that. And so it looks exactly like what I would want out of a nice hand quilted type stitch, just like that there. So that's the look. And what you're seeing in the middle, what you can't see where it looks like fabric, that's where your monofilament thread is. So you want to pick a monofilament that's going to work with the fabric. If you have a really dark fabric, they have a smoke color. If not, you just go with the regular clear. So we're now ready to go put that on the project. I don't have any more adjustments. If I needed to, I'd adjust the tension or what have you. But I think we're ready to go. So I'm going to grab our project, get that set up, and we'll move on to the next. Okay, I've already gone in and I did 3 of the 4 corners. So I'll do the 4th one just so you can see how I finished that process off. This time we're going to go into settings. And last time when I had our digital dual feed foot on, I had you turn off the temporary settings for the temporary endpoint settings. So on page 3, I had it turned on last time. This time we're going to, turn it off. And so what that means is when we activate that setting, it's going to, instead of putting the sticker right in front, because we're not doing a temporary stop, we're going to move that sticker just to the left of our seam line that we want to end on, or whatever it is that we want to reference to end on. So we put it just to the left. This means it won't stop until it's actually done. So we're going to use that because we're just using a straight stitch. It's not a zigzag. There's not a lot of movement to the stitch. So we're going to go with that and give you a chance to play with both of those. So now we're going to take you onto the fabric where I already have it set up. So you can see my stickers just to the left of where we're going to stitch. So you want it to be, within an inch or so of where the presser foot's going to come down. And I'm going to turn on my laser, the guideline, and it's, again, the main line. We've already set it up. I'm going to switch it to maybe white so you guys can see that a little bit better. See if we can pull it up on there. So I've got my guideline there. I'm just going to place that and go right down the center based off of just eyeballing that center point. So we're going to take this and we're just going to let the machine do its thing. It's going to recognize that endpoint. And again, it's off to the left side, so I'm just letting the machine recognize that. And as soon as it's done, it's going to stop. That'll allow me to go to the next side and finish. So right at that point, and it is perfect. So we're going to take and we're going to switch over to the left. Understand, I'm going to do a tie off. And again, I've been saying tie off, and the button that we're referencing is this one right up here. So I'm going to hold that in, it'll tie that off. So when you use your scissors on here, just understand when you're using monofilament, sometimes because it has a lot of memory to the thread, it likes to spring back. Metallic threads like to do that as well. So you may find that your threads are a little bit short. And in that case, if they are, you're going to want to get in there and just before you start to sew, you're going to want to make sure that you pull a little bit of extra thread out so you don't start and have it and have that thread be short or come out of the eye of the needle. Again, it doesn't happen often, but when you use monofilament threads, it is a possibility. Now this time, maybe I'll try, and I've always been putting it to the left. We can put it to the right. They do say, they have recommended to the left, so let's just stick with the theme. We're going to just put it a little bit to the left, about an inch or so to the left of the stitch line, but down at the ending point where we want it to end. So my sticker's there. I'm going to go in, I'm just going to look underneath and make sure that I'm starting with my needle coming down on the where I want it to start in the seam. and the little laser is there. So we're going to go right down the center, and this is the fourth side. So the fourth triangle, and that will finish off the stitching that we're doing in there. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to do our applique with the blanket stitch. So I'll show you that. And then we're going to do couching with the sewing machine. We've done couching with the embroidery, but we're going to do couching with the sewing machine. So I'm going to get that set up, and we will meet back here when I've got that ready. Okay, so I've done a little bit of prep work for this next part of the project. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a blanket stitch coming down. And the prep work that I've got so far is I've placed the stickers. Now, it's really important that you place the stickers the correct way. So we're going to, and this is that we're going to stitch on around the inside of, or the outside of this block where the tree is. So I'm going to choose to first come down this side here. And that big bold line, you just place it on your seam line down here. But the big thing is that's your stop sign. That bold line needs to go this way, telling the machine, don't go past here. After I stitch to there, I'll take that sticker off, of course, and then it's going to go this way. And that's why that next sticker is set up with that big bold line there as a stop sign. One more time here, stop, and it'll be stopped on there. And then when we're coming back across, we will put another sticker down, but this is the begin point. So that's how we prepped the fabric for this. And what I'll do next is I'll take you onto the screen and show you the settings that we're going to use on the screen of the machine. Now that I have my fabric prepped with the stickers to have those stops in place, we have to do a couple things. One, we're going to go into settings, and the option that we're going to activate for the pattern stop, we want endpoint, and it's on page 3. Endpoint settings, temporary stop, we want that turned on. So turn that back on. And it's really kind of important that you understand this. You can't use the pattern end option. So I can't use end settings, which I'm going into right now, with the projector. So at the same time. However, I really like to use the projector when I'm doing applique. It just keeps me on track and everything looks really, really awesome. So what I'm going to do is show you how I do a workaround to make that happen. I'm going to turn on the projector. So it's that cone-shaped icon. Once we turn that on, that came up and told me I needed to cancel endpoint settings, which is fine. With the projector turned on, what we're going to have, let me move you over to the fabric. So with our projector turned on, this is a really, really cool feature. So there's our stitch. And we have options that we can adjust from here. So I'm going to kind of go through some of these. So first, on the left-hand side, we can take with our stylus. This allows you to adjust for the type of background that you want, how much lighting you want to work with. And so you can kind of play with that till you get the look that you want. For the camera, this really is the best look because I think you can really see those stitches on there. And what I'm looking for is I don't want my applique to go either left or right of that line. I want it to be right down that edge. So I'm going to just get that lined up. And it's really nice, even with this big bulky foot, I feel really comfortable just watching those stitches. So that's what I'm going to use. Now, I mentioned that we can't use that with the endpoint settings. However, I put the stickers on there, as you can see down here at the bottom. So I have the stickers on here, and we're going to show you what we do to make that happen. Now, remember, the sticker that you're going to, that bold line has to be going this way. That's really the stop sign when it goes this way to make the machine understand that that's where you want it to stop. So I'm going to go up. We're going to get this set. If you wanted to make changes to your length, you could do it right here, and you'll see it happening on the fabric. I personally, or the width, I personally just want it to be at the default settings, so I'm going to reset those on my screen over here. So I reset those. If you wanted to shift the stitches so it lined up with a line that's on there for you to guide, you can do that. So you could shift those over. Again, whatever's going to be most comfortable for you. I want to go in and I'm just going to get my needle lined up with that corner, so it's right where I want to start. and then I'm going to put my presser foot down. Now, again, the goal is for me to keep that right in a line with the stitch line. I've got the chalk highlighting it so you can see it. So I don't want it this way, and I don't want it this way. I want that line right on top of that. So now we're going to take and we are going to stitch down. Now, because this doesn't work with that endpoint sticker, I'm going to zoom out so you can see this a little bit. When we get down to that endpoint sticker that's down there, about 2 inches or so away, 2 to 3 inches, I'm going to take and I'm going to stop, and I'm going to allow the machine to go in and recognize that that sticker's on by changing on my machine the function. So let's just get this machine started with the applique. So we're going to go in and just use that start stop button is what I'm going to use. And again, my concentration really is just on this line right here, the projection. And I love the way that that digital dual feed foot just really pulls that fabric through. Nice and smooth. So now, as we're getting close, when this gets close, just right above that lighting, I want you to stop the machine. And here's why. Because we can't use, as I explained before, we can't use the projector with the endpoint settings. What we're going to do is we're going to go onto our machine and we're going to do a couple things. Now, I should have done this maybe beforehand to prep this. I usually don't use the guide settings with the projector. So what I am going to do is I'm going to show you what I would do. Let's turn on the guide. And we're going to turn on the main guideline, and I'm going to use the left and right shift that's on there, that down at the bottom. And I am going to shift my white line, because I have my main guideline as white. I want that white line to match up exactly to the blanket stitch. And the reason why is because when I turn off, so right now I'm just inside, right there, I'm right on. When I turn off the projector, I'll still be able to use this line as a guide. So I should have done that at the very beginning, but since I didn't, we're okay to do that now. So I have the machine set to stop, and then what I did is I wanted to stop this when those lights get close to that sticker, because this is where we have to turn off on our machine. We have to actually not turn off. We're going to activate the pattern end. So I do this to get these really smooth points and corners. So we're going to go in and we're going to go into Stitch Attributes. We're going to touch the icon at the bottom, and it's going to come up and it's going to say Endpoint Settings. We want the endpoint settings to actually be this one here. That's going to adjust the blanket stitch. So when it goes down, it adjusts it so I can make that turn and make this really, really smooth and make those corners look like just, perfect boxes. And we have the sticker placed right in front. So we've already turned on that setting in page 3 of settings. So we're good there. The next thing that I'm going to do is bring you back over to the machine so you can see this and the process. So now what's happened is you notice that our projection is turned off, and as far as the stitch, it's not projected. But because we do have that grid line on, and this is one time I'd have the grid line, be a part of this. Because it's turned on, I can use that now just to go down the rest of that edge. So now I'm going to keep that line right on that edge. And now the machine is recognizing that there's an end stop. So it's going to now adjust the pattern. It's telling me on my screen, after removing the endpoint sticker, continue sewing. So it's saying remove that endpoint sticker. So we can remove that. And now all we're going to do, I'm keeping that line right on the edge of this or right on the stitch line. And now we're going to go in and we're going to touch OK on the screen of my machine. And I'm going to just let this stitch down. And all I'm doing is I'm letting the machine, I'm guiding it, but the machine's going to find where that end point is, and it's going to stop, and it's going to make those stitches just right for that turn. So it's now made that adjustment. I'm going to lift the presser foot up. I'm going to rotate that. I'm going to line this up, and it should line up pretty even, which it does. And then what I'm going to do is I like to personally hand rotate the next few stitches, because I want to see when it comes forward, I want to see where that stitch is going to go next. So I'm hand rotating it, and now it's bumping over, and it's going to be almost right on. So I'm going to slightly slide it forward just a little bit, and now my stitch just jumps straight over, comes back, and now we're ready to go. So I could go off of this line here all the way down, but at this point, again, I really do value having the projector turned on. So I'm going to go back to my machine. I'm going to touch the little cone shape. It's going to turn the projector back on. The projector is going to come on. And remember, the end pattern setting is off while this is on. But now I can go in and I'm going to let it do its thing all the way down. So easy, because I can see that line perfectly. And then once we get to where our little area down here is a lot closer to the sticker, once we're down to that point, we're going to stop the machine, and we're going to go back over to our screen as I did before. We're going to go into Stitch Attributes. We're going to touch the bottom icon. That bottom icon is what turns on Endpoint settings. It's already turned on, and so now it can read that as an endpoint. It's going to see that. It's now going to stop, so I can take out the sticker. It knows where that endpoint is, so it can adjust for that endpoint. So it can go through. We're going to touch OK on the screen of the machine. And now we're going to let this go in, and we're just going to let it finish off. It's going to adjust for the endpoint. And now we're going to rotate, and the process is the same. And again, it's just going to give me these really nice boxed corners. So I'm going to go into here. We're going to place this down. I'm going to put the presser foot back down. I'm going to hand turn my stitch through just to make sure that I like where it's going. And I do. So it's coming back, and it's going to come right back on top of, I should have pointed that out, your little line up top, that line that's up there, that's where your stitch is going to go. So it's going to come through here. It's going to jump over to the left. There's my nice little box in the corner, and I'm going to just start this back up. Now, if you don't want to turn on your projector for this, I'll do this side without it. Maybe you just want to use the guideline. Again, I really prefer the projector on. I just find that I'm a lot more accurate when that projector is on. But you could just use that guideline as well. So I'm just using the guideline right now, and because we have that guideline on, it is active to go in and read the endpoint already. So we don't have to stop there. That is one advantage maybe. So now we don't have to stop. It's going to stop on its own, but we don't have to stop and turn that function on. And so now we can go in, we can hit the OK button on our screen, and then we're going to say, start the machine back up. It now knows where the end is, because that's its job. So it's finishing that endpoint off. It adjusted for it. We can rotate it. We're going to rotate around, and we're going to come back down the other direction. So I'm going to finish this off just by coming down the other direction. That time I didn't check that, which I should have. The other thing that I need to do, this is the last side. So because this is my last side, I need to make sure that there's an endpoint sticker in place, which there is not. So I'm going to let it just kind of come down, get almost all the way there, to where I have at least something underneath the fabric to place it onto. And now I'm going to go in. I'm going to clip this guy. That's my thread from the very beginning. And we're going to put this endpoint sticker right on top of this and in a line with the stitch line that we're coming down on. And so now it knows where it's going to find that. It's going to know where that's supposed to be. And we're just going to let the machine come down and do its job. Tells us to take off the sticker. And we're going to go in and touch OK on our screen. And I'm going to start this back up. And as it comes through, it knows where that endpoint is. So it's just taking a few little stitches. And it's going to adjust that through. And it's got one more. I'm just letting it do its thing. And once it's done, you're going to take, and I like to go in and hold in the tie-in stitch. So that's now tied in, and we can clip that. And then we've got really nice, just finished boxes. Now, I'm going to zoom. In class, we talked about accessing the user manual, on-screen manual, and it's just this little question mark up on top. So when we touch the question mark up here, there's lots of things. One, there's also videos. And we're going to go in, and I want to go into the PDF manual. We could go through the different options, but we're going to do the PDF manual. We're going to go into sewing. And I want to show you this because it's a really cool feature. If I go in up in search up top, I can type in something that I want to research, and it will actually go through. So I typed in couching. It's going to go through, and it's going to actually... Let's go to the beginning. So it's going to go into couching, and I can touch these arrows. It will go in and find couching wherever it says couching. You can zoom in up here with the 100, or you can pinch and zoom on this machine to whatever you want to see. So if you want more information on couching and the tools, you can do that through here. What I'm going to do is just scroll through, because what I want to actually pull up and show you as a frame of reference, there's a chart in here with certain things, and one of them will show you the stitches that you can use. You can use a straight stitch, you can use a zigzag, there's different options, but the stitch that I want to use is, and I like to narrow it down, and again, I'm just scrolling through, and I found the word couching stitch. It's actually, see if I can zoom that in so you guys can see that. It's Q-21, so Q20. And it's going to actually say that on the on-screen manual. So if you're not sure where certain things are, this is a great reference point. It also goes through and shows you how to put, the attachments on and those type of things. So I'm going to get this all squared away, get the attachments on, get it ready to do the couching with the actual digital dual feed or the Move It foot. So I'll get that all prepped, and then we will come back to our project and get that on there. And that will complete the video for this part of the series. And then we'll have one more video that will finish off the project with the border function in embroidery, which is really awesome. And then we're going to have a guest appearance by Denise. She's going to show you guys how to do the self-binding that we talked about in class. So that'll be following this will be a separate video for those items. But let's finish off the couching next. So I'm going to grab those attachments and get the machine set up to go. Okay, this is actually going to be the third time that I've done this. I've recorded twice. First time I didn't hit record, so I went through and did all of the couching without putting it on film. The second time I recorded but didn't have the mic turned on. So hopefully third time's a charm. So my border is going to be a little bit thicker than yours. It will have 2 layers, actually 3 layers of couching. I actually kind of like it. So sometimes your mistakes are really what brings out even better products, but totally on accident, but we're going to go through this. So I've got the machine set up, and let me really quickly just go through and explain. So we chose stitch Q21. That was the stitch that the machine in utility stitches. So utility, Q, and then 21. And then what I did is I turned on the, not the laser, which is what I have on there, but I turned on the projector. And I used the projector to set up the actual size or the width of the stitch that I wanted to do. So let's get in and let's turn that on so you can see that. So this is the width that I went with of the stitch. Let's see if you can kind of see in there. And it's pretty narrow on that width. And the reason why, you'll see as I thread this up, it's a really good width to just get the yarn covered and couched down. I don't want it sticking out too far, so I need it to be covered. Now, when we are setting up for couching, there are some attachments that you're going to need. You're going to need your couching guide for sewing. This one has kind of that bend to it. And that guide just hooks in, just similar to the other one. It's just going to go in right up here. We're going to drop that in on the front, so you've got the guide here. So I've taken the yarn, and the yarn has gone up through that vertical thread guide. You're then going to come in through here, so that's through the side. There's an area in the front, you're going to go through there. And then I take, and you can take the foot off if you need to. I don't find it necessary to take the foot off. There is a little hole on the couching guide foot that came with the couching attachment for sewing that goes onto your Move It foot or your the digital dual feed. So I'm going to take the little wire, and I've got the little wire threaded through there. So now we're going to pull our yarn through. So we've got that taken care of. And you want to pull it to the back. Now I've already gone through and put my little stickers in, my little stop signs, so they're already in there. We're going to go in, and I think I'm going to start up here this time. This will be like I said, the third time we've done this. So I'm going to just start on this point up here. But here's again how I determine the width. Let me just put this down for a second. I took the yarn and I pulled it straight across, and I adjusted that width until I couldn't really see it sticking out on these edges. So you can adjust your width down here. Let me move that. So you can use your little stylus and adjust your width here. This is one way to do it. So right now that width is adjusting every time I click this. It's going wider and wider and wider on here. Now it was originally at like a 4, which is or so, which that's too wide. You can see it actually sticking out on the sides. If we zoom in, you're going to see that sticking out on the sides of the actual yarn, and you can see it over here on the left and on the right. So that's just too wide for this to work. So I adjusted the width, and I adjusted it down, and I was, in about a 2 on the width. You can look at that and see where it's going to fit best, again, depending on what you're couching down. So right now, it's perfect. It's not going too far out. And then you can adjust the length. I like mine a little tighter, so I went to, like 0.8 or a 1 on the length. So now that we've gone through and we've set everything up, we do have our pattern stop set up. And remember, the setting that we have turned on right now, because we are going to come down and we're going to act as if the pattern stop that's in the corner here, we're going to act. And again, remember your stop signs. They have to be set up the right way. So that dark line, if you want it to stop while it's coming this direction, when I'm sewing this way, I got to have that stop sign right there, meaning those 2 dark lines. So with that set up, we're ready to go. I am going to go in. I've decided I actually like doing the couching now that I've done it multiple times in intentional or unintentional. I decided I like the couching actually. Before I told you to put it in the back on the embroidery, I started to pull the yarn just in front and putting it in my lap and letting it run up to that tall thread guide up top. And then once it runs through that thread guide up top, I just have that sitting in my lap, and then I can control it. If it looks like too much is feeding in and it's going to be an issue, I can grab a hold of that and help just keep that and maintain that. So I am going to turn on in my stitch attributes section. I'm going to go to that bottom icon, and that's got our settings. Remember, for endpoint settings, we want that turned on. It doesn't matter how it ends it, meaning it doesn't have to do a half pattern or anything of that nature. We just need it to come down and stop when it gets there. So I have that turned on. And remember, when you turn that on, that means that your laser is going to be turned, not your laser, sorry, your projector is going to be turned off. So right now, I'm just going to use this as my guide. If I need it, if I wanted to, because I now have all these extra layers, I could put a guide in here. which would maybe make sense at this point. But since you guys aren't going to have 3 rows of stitching unless you decide to do more, we'll just go with it how it is. So I'm going to take and we're going to get this started. And so I'm going to go in and we're just going to hit our start button. And I'm going to just let this go down, and I'm couching right next to it. So again, we're kind of creating more layers here. But I do like it. It looks pretty cool. My cameraman, Joe, my son, he said, yeah, you should always do it with at least 2 rows. We'll see how the third one goes. But it does. I think it really looks cool. So we're going to touch OK, and it's going to go in, and it stopped automatically because it recognized the sticker. It's now coming to that end. We're going to let it do its thing, and then we're going to turn that corner. So we're going in. We're going to turn the corner, and we're going to now get started, going the other direction. And it's really just simple. I mean, the machine's going to feed that yarn right through there. You want to watch, make sure that your fabric can feed through. I'm getting hung up sometimes on the module on the left-hand side. And normally I'd be sitting in front of the machine to kind of handle all of this, but right now the camera takes precedence. So we're going to let this stitch all the way down. And again, it's going to hit that pattern end. It sees the sticker. And the reason that we're using the one in front of it is because, meaning that we're having it do that stop, we had it turned on in settings, is because I have the stickers not quite an inch away. If I wanted to do it where I could just keep stitching and it would go all the way to the end without stopping until it was time to stop, I would have to go into settings on page 3, turn the function off that I have currently turned on, and those stickers would have to be, they would have to be an inch away, left or right, preferably to the left. I'm going to go just a little bit further. I got a little bit of space on here to make that turn, so I'm going to stitch into that. So now we're going to come down that other side. I'm going to put that foot down, and we're just going to come down this other direction, keeping this right up next to there. So if you like this look, I don't know that you had enough yarn in your kit to do it 3 times. But it does change this project quite a bit, and it does look cool. I rather like it. So we're going to let it keep coming down. It's going to make a really strong border, that's for sure. We're going to turn this. Oh, we're not going to turn it. Sorry, we're going to finish it. Getting ahead of myself on that. We're going to let the machine go down and say, hey, it's time. So now we're going to turn. We're going to come this other direction, and we're 1.5 lengths away. We've got to go down this side and then just turn and go halfway through to our beginning point. But I hope you guys enjoyed this project. There's still a little bit more. This is the second video of 3. The third video is going to be us going in and using we're going to be using the embroidery to create quilted borders. And it's really awesome because the machine's going to calculate everything that you need on that design for you. And so I think that's going to be a lot of fun. And then we're going to see if we can't get a guest appearance from Denise to teach you guys, show you her method for doing a self-binding, where we're going to pull that back fabric up over the top to do your binding. So that will be in the third video from this little series. Third one's going to be pretty quick. It won't be quite as long. So we're finally to the last little part. And we're going to take, let me make sure that I've gone all the way down on that corner. I'm going to come down a little bit further in. Okay, so now we're going to turn this baby around. We're going to put this down, and we're going to manually stop this one because it's where we started, is what we're going for. It's going to be pretty thick down there in that middle area, but it's going to be awesome. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this, learning a little bit about your machine. When we come to the end, I'm going to do the pattern end and let it tie that off. And then the yarn is going to be just fine for us to go in and just actually clip that. You know, some projects you have to pull it to the back side. On here, the type of stitching that we used and the fact that it's the yarn that we have, it's going to be fine to clip it right up into there. And so now I've got a really, really nice, big, bold, super bold border on here. So I do like how it turned out. Pretty cool. It's got that little shimmer to it too in there. So there's actually 3 layers, 3 rows of couching on this particular sample on the outside. So that's part 2. So we'll come back for part 3 and finish that off with the borders in here, and then again the self-binding.